The mist comes first. It always does, here at the edge of things, where the forest floor holds the night's coolness long after the sky's begun to pale. You're standing very still. The air around you is warm and thick, carrying the green smell of growing things. Ferns and cycads and mosses so old their ancestors watched the first flowers open, in a world that had never seen a bloom before. The sound you hear is not silence. It is something older than silence. It is the world breathing. Somewhere above the canopy, which rises in layered curtains of deep emerald and shadow, a pterosaur turns a slow, patient circle on a thermal you cannot feel from where you stand. Its wingspan blots a brief shadow across the dappled light, and then it is gone, absorbed back into the blue distance of a sky that goes on longer than you could ever follow. The morning is early. The dew has not yet lifted from the wide, ribbed leaves of the plants at your feet. You're in no hurry. There is nowhere else to be. The world before you is ancient and enormous and unhurried, and something in the deepest part of you recognizes it, not as a memory exactly, but as something quieter than memory, a belonging, a return to something your body has always known but your waking mind has long since set aside. Let that feeling settle now, like sediment drifting slowly to the floor of a warm, still sea. Welcome to the Cretaceous. Welcome to a world before the word world existed, when the continents were still learning their shapes, and the sky was a shade of blue so pure it had never been breathed by anything that worried. You are safe here. You are still. The story is already beginning, and all you have to do is rest and listen, as the long green ancient world unfolds around you in the softest possible light. There is a particular kind of quiet that only exists at the edge of a prehistoric forest. Not the quiet of an empty room, or the quiet of a late-night street after the last car has passed. This is the quiet of an ecosystem that has been practicing existence for so long that every element within it has found its perfect place, its perfect note, its perfect rhythm. The insects speak in low, continuous tones. The trees filter the wind into something almost melodic. Even the earth, packed dense with root and clay and the slow decomposition of 1,000 generations of leaves, seems to hum at a frequency just below hearing. Tonight, we will walk softly through that world. We will move through landscapes that existed long before human eyes were there to see them, and we will see them nonetheless, through the eyes of imagination, through the patient lens of science, through the storyteller's oldest gift, which is the ability to stand in a place that is no longer there and feel it, fully, as though it never left. The stories you are about to hear take place in a world inspired by one of the great imaginative creations of the 20th century, a place where the past was not merely studied but resummoned, where ancient creatures walked again through forests that had been rebuilt to receive them. It is a world of wonder and of deep animal stillness, of sounds that carry across water, of light that filters green through 1,000,000 leaves, of creatures so large they make the ground tremble, and so perfectly formed by millions of years of evolution that they need nothing from us, not our admiration, not our fear, not our understanding. They simply exist, as they have always existed, as everything that has ever lived has existed, completely and then not. If you enjoy drifting into sleep with stories like this one, stories of prehistoric worlds, ancient creatures and landscapes that time has only half forgotten, subscribe to the channel. New stories arrive every week, and they will be here waiting for you whenever the night calls for them. For now, let everything else go. Let the day's noise dissolve. Let your body sink into whatever surface holds you, and let your breath become slow and even and unhurried. The Cretaceous does not rush. The ancient forest does not check the time, and tonight, neither do you. The story begins in the green hour before full light, in a place where the air is warm and the ground is soft and the world is so immeasurably old that your own brief life becomes, in the most comforting possible way, a small and peaceful thing. Close your eyes, the mist is still rising, the pterosaur is still turning its slow circle overhead. The ferns are trembling slightly in a breeze that carries the scent of rain from somewhere very far away. And somewhere in the deep green distance, something enormous is moving through the trees, slowly, gently, with the unhurried grace of a creature that has never needed to hurry, because the world was made for it, and it was made for the world, and there is nothing more to be done about any of it than to simply continue and breathe and be. If you're drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. You're standing at the edge of a shallow lagoon, and the world is just becoming visible. The sky to the east carries the faintest suggestion of colour. Not yet gold, not yet orange, but something between mauve and grey that has no good word in any modern language because no modern language was spoken when this colour existed first. The water at your feet is perfectly still. It reflects the sky above it with such faithfulness that for a moment you cannot be entirely certain which is which, whether you're looking down at water or up at sky, whether the world is right side up at all. This is the Cretaceous period, somewhere in what will one day be called North America, in a time approximately 75 million years before any human hand will leave its print in any cave or clay. The land mass beneath your feet is not yet the shape you know from maps. The continents are still arranged in their slow, patient drift, and the shallow inland sea that bisects this land from north to south shimmers in the growing light with a colour that is neither quite blue nor quite green, but something generously in between. Along its shore, which is low and gradually shelving and edged with reed-like vegetation, the first birds, or what will one day be called birds, though they are still working out the precise details of being birds, are beginning to move. Their calls are simple, a single note, repeated, a small sound in a very large world. The forest begins perhaps 30 metres back from the water's edge. It is not the kind of forest you are likely to be familiar with. No oak, no elm, no pine in the arrangement you know. The trees here are cycads and araucarias and early angiosperms still discovering the possibilities of flowers, their shapes simultaneously familiar and alien, like something seen in a dream, where the details are almost right but the proportions keep shifting. Their canopy is dense and layered, trapping the night's coolness in its lower levels while the upper branches already begin to catch the first warmth of the approaching day. Between those layers of canopy, shafts of dusty light will soon begin to fall, and in them insects will rise in spiralling columns that look, from a distance, like smoke from a fire that is not quite there. You do not need to move, the world is moving perfectly well without your assistance. A small mammal, warm-blooded, quick-eyed, about the size of a modern shrew, emerges from the leaf litter at the base of a cycad to your left and pauses, perfectly still, its nose working in the direction of the lagoon. It is your distant ancestor, this creature, though it would not know you and you would barely recognize it. It is precisely as complicated as it needs to be, and not a fraction more. It drinks briefly from the lagoon's edge, and then it is gone again, back into the roots and leaves and quiet dark of the forest floor. The water closes over the small disturbance its drinking made and is still again in moments. This is how most of existence works, in this world and in all worlds. The small creatures move and feed and disappear back into the vegetation. The large creatures move more slowly and cast longer shadows and leave deeper prints. The trees grow at a pace too gradual to watch, their rings accumulating in the darkness of their own heartwood like a diary written in code. The water flows toward the sea that swallowed so many of its predecessors, carrying particles of red clay from the riverbanks and flakes of mica that catch the light for a moment before settling, joining the sediment that is patiently becoming the rock that will one day become the cliff that someone will one day climb, finding in its layers the evidence of this very morning, this very stillness, this very light. The temperature is rising now, not abruptly. This world does not do anything abruptly, not in the geological sense, not in the daily sense. It rises the way a tide rises, incrementally, almost imperceptibly, until you notice that you are warmer than you were, and the dew on the broad leaves around you has begun to evaporate in small, visible wisps. The air takes on that particular quality of early morning warmth in a tropical place, where the humidity holds the heat like a blanket and the smell of everything, earth and water and green growth, and the faint, sweet decay of fallen leaves, becomes slightly more intense, slightly more present, as though the day is leaning in to introduce itself. Somewhere in the forest, something is moving. You hear it first as a vibration rather than a sound, a deep rhythmic pulse that the ground transmits to the soles of your feet before your ears receive it. Then the sound itself arrives, a low, resonant boom, repeated at slow, even intervals, like a very slow heartbeat. The intervals between the sounds are long enough that you might almost forget you're waiting for the next one before it arrives, and when it does, it brings with it a trembling of the lagoon's surface, a slight ripple spreading outward from some epicenter you cannot yet see. The reeds at the water's edge lean fractionally toward the source and then recover. It is a sauropod. You know this without needing to see it, the way you know things in certain kinds of dreams, not from memory, but from a deeper kind of knowing that belongs to the dreaming mind itself. It is moving through the forest parallel to the water's edge, heading somewhere with the unhurried purposefulness of a creature that has never needed to hurry, because the landscape will rearrange itself around its needs, rather than the other way around. Its footsteps are the boom you heard. Its passage will leave circular depressions in the ground that will fill slowly with water and become temporary ponds, and in those ponds, small things will live for a season before the ground dries, and the ponds disappear and the whole transaction is forgotten by everything except the earth itself, which forgets nothing, only buries it. The reeds settle, the ripples spread and diminish and are absorbed by the lagoon's shore. The small mammal, or perhaps a different small mammal, it is difficult to be certain, has reappeared at the water's edge and is sitting very still, its sides rising and falling with its tiny rapid breathing, watching the place where the ripples came from with an attention that belongs not to curiosity but to survival. When no further movement comes, it relaxes by a degree so small as to be almost theoretical and resumes its drinking. You are breathing slowly. You have been breathing slowly for some time now, and your body has noticed, and your body is grateful. The warm air fills your lungs and leaves them without urgency. The ground beneath your feet is soft and gives slightly under your weight, and you are aware of being held by it, gently, without insistence, the way the earth holds everything that stands on it, from the smallest insect to the largest animal that ever walked its surface. You are part of this holding right now. You are part of this world, even though this world is 75 million years in the past, even though the ground beneath your feet and the air in your lungs and the light on the lagoon surface will undergo transformations you cannot imagine before they become the ground and air and light you have always known. Everything is continuous. Everything is connected. Every breath you take is made of molecules that have been breathed by things that no longer exist, and everything is fine. The sky continues to lighten. The mauve-grey gives way to something warmer, and then the first direct light of the sun finds the top of the forest canopy and sets it briefly, beautifully ablaze. Not with fire, but with the particular brightness of morning, when the light is still low enough to be gold, and the shadows are long, and the world is divided cleanly into the illuminated and the still waiting for illumination. In that light, the upper leaves of the forest are translucent and brilliant, like stained glass in a cathedral no one has built yet and no one will build for another 70 million years. It is one of the most beautiful things you have ever seen, or almost seen, or dreamed of seeing. It exists in the space between those categories, as all the best things do. Rest here for a moment in this green ancient morning. The day is only just beginning, and there is no hurry, and the lagoon is still, and the world is breathing all around you, and you are perfectly safe, and the story is only just beginning to unfold. There is an island somewhere in the Pacific. Or rather, there is a concept of an island, a place that has existed in the imagination of our time the way certain islands exist in the imagination of the sea, as both real and mythological simultaneously, as a place where the rules of what is possible have been quietly and irreversibly renegotiated. The island has a name, but names matter less than what the island contains. What the island contains is time. Not time in the ordinary sense of clocks and calendars and the slow accumulation of days, but time in the geological sense. Ancient time, deep time, the kind of time that makes the history of civilizations feel like a single morning's work. You are approaching the island by sea in a small research vessel that moves through the water, with a low consistent vibration you can feel through the hull if you press your hand against it. The sea is grey-green this morning, with a swell that is large enough to be felt but not large enough to be concerning, and the horizon ahead of you is a line of cloud that sits just above the water in a way that suggests land behind it without quite revealing the land itself. There is a quality to the light at this hour, mid-morning, the sun already well up but the air still carrying the coolness of the night before, that makes everything look slightly more real than usual. The colours of the water, the white of the wave crests, the dense blue-green of the approaching clouds, All of it is vivid in a way that feels like a gift. The island, when it finally emerges from the cloud, is not what you might expect if you were expecting something small and manageable. It rises from the sea with the confidence of something that knows exactly what it is. Steep volcanic slopes covered in dense vegetation, the interior hidden by both topography and foliage, peaks occasionally lost in the low cloud that wraps around the highest ground like a permanent mist. The coastline is varied. Here a stretch of dark volcanic rock where the waves arrive in satisfying foam-white explosions. There a small cove of grey-black sand, sheltered and calm. Further along a band of mangroves whose roots reach into the tidal zone in complex interwoven patterns that make the boundary between land and sea a suggestion rather than a line. What you cannot see from the water, and what you will not see until you are deep into the interior, is that the forest is different from other forests. It is different not in any way that immediately announces itself. The trees look like trees, the ground looks like ground, the light filters through the canopy in the familiar dappled way of any dense woodland. But the differences reveal themselves gradually, as you move deeper. A leaf larger than seems quite right. A fern frond with a geometry that belongs to a different era. The quality of the silence, not the silence of an undisturbed ecosystem, but something older, denser, a silence that has more layers to it than modern silence carries. And then, eventually, if you are patient and quiet and moving slowly enough that the forest accepts your presence, rather than contracting around it, you begin to hear things. The sounds, when they come, do not come all at once. They arrive the way understanding arrives, incrementally, piece by piece, each new element asking you to revise what you thought you knew about what you were hearing. First, simply the sense that something very large is breathing somewhere to the north of you, beyond the ridge of volcanic rock that rises from the forest floor in a dark, weathered wall. The breathing is slow, impossibly slow for anything that breathes voluntarily, so slow that it might be the wind, or the settling of the rock, or simply the island's own metabolism, which runs at a pace calibrated to geological time rather than biological time. But then the second breath comes, and it carries with it a slight vibration that moves through the root-packed earth and reaches you through your feet, and you understand that what you are feeling is not the island. It is something on the island. You are not afraid. That's the first thing to understand about this world, this particular configuration of reality that you have entered tonight through the gateway of story and the warm gravity of near sleep. This is not a world that requires your fear. The creatures here are not here to frighten you. They have other concerns, older concerns so vast and unhurried that your presence barely registers on the edge of their awareness. You are to them the way a drifting leaf is to a river, noticed briefly if at all, and then accommodated without difficulty. The island has a rhythm that takes a little time to feel, but that, once felt, is unmistakable. It is the rhythm of a place where multiple timescales are operating simultaneously. The geological rhythm of the volcanic rock, which moves in units of millions of years. The ecological rhythm of the forest, which moves in units of decades and seasons. The biological rhythm of the creatures within it, which move in units of hours and days. And your own rhythm, which is the rhythm of breath and heartbeat, and the slow, warm descent into the state of rest that you are already halfway into. All of these rhythms are happening at once, layered over each other, and the effect is something like music, complex and patterned, with harmonics that emerge from the interaction of the different tempos rather than from any single layer considered alone. Somewhere above you, in the middle canopy of the forest, something calls. It is a sound unlike any you have heard in any living forest. Lower than birdsong, less musical, but not unbeautiful. There is something in it that suggests communication, suggests that the caller is not simply announcing its presence, but saying something specific to someone specific, though what is being said and who is being addressed are both beyond your ability to know. The call hangs in the air for a moment longer than you would expect it to, as though the air itself is reluctant to let it go, and then it diminishes and is absorbed by the dense foliage, by the bark of the trees, by the thick padding of moss and leaf litter that covers everything at this level of the forest. The island is not a simple place. No place that holds this much compressed time could be simple. There are layers here, literal layers, in the sedimentary record of the volcanic rock, ecological layers, in the way the vegetation is organized by altitude and moisture and light. Historical layers, in the sense that the island itself is a kind of living archive, a place where the deep past has been given temporary permission to persist into a present that would otherwise have moved on without it. Standing here, in the green dimness of a forest that does not quite belong to your century, you feel those layers as a kind of weight, not an oppressive weight, not a weight that bears down on you with any discomfort, but the comfortable, substantial weight of a blanket, of warmth, of depth. Your breathing has slowed to match the rhythm of the place. This happens without your having to think about it, the way all the best adaptations happen, not through effort but through the simple biological intelligence of a body that knows when it is safe and adjusts itself accordingly. The air here is warm and rich with oxygen, the product of a photosynthesis that has been running for millions of years through lineages of plants that evolved alongside the creatures they now share this island with. Every breath you take is intimately connected to every breath everything on this island has ever taken. You are part of the island's biochemistry now, however briefly. The light is shifting as the morning progresses. The cloud above the island's peaks has thinned slightly, and the sunlight, when it comes through, falls in broader, warmer shafts that reach the forest floor and illuminate small patches of the undergrowth in pools of gold-green light. In those pools, the detail becomes extraordinary. Every vein of every leaf, every filament of every fern frond, every grain of the dark volcanic soil made suddenly vivid and particular by the focused attention of the sun. Then the cloud shifts and the light narrows and the detail retreats again into the beautiful generalized green of the shade. The island remembers everything. That is perhaps its most essential quality, not the creatures it contains, extraordinary as they are, but the fact of its memory, the fact that nothing is truly lost here, that every evolutionary experiment, every environmental adaptation, every creature that has ever walked or flown or swum through this particular arrangement of latitude and longitude has left something of itself behind, encoded in the island's geology and ecology and atmosphere. You're walking through a living memory, and the memory is old, and the memory is vast, and the memory is, in the quietest and most literal sense, at rest. Let yourself rest with it. Let the island's ancient patience become your patience. Let the deep, slow rhythm of this place become the rhythm of your breath, and let your breath become the rhythm of your body letting go, one breath at a time, of everything it no longer needs to hold. The story continues, but you're already beginning to move toward the edge of it, toward the place where story becomes dream, and all of this, the island, the mist, the breathing thing beyond the ridge, the ancient forest and its ancient light, becomes simply the texture of where your mind is as it drifts. The interior of the island reveals itself slowly, the way all genuine landscapes reveal themselves, not all at once as in a painting or a photograph, but piece by piece, as you move through it and it moves through you, and the two of you arrive at a mutual understanding of what the encounter will involve. The forest thins as you climb, transitioning over perhaps a kilometre of gradual elevation from the dense, humidity-soaked woodland of the lower slopes to something more open, more savanna-like, where the trees are spaced widely enough that you can see between them, and the light falls unobstructed in broad pools on the long pale green grass that covers the ground between the trunks. This is where the herds are. You hear them before you see them, a sound like distant thunder, continuous and low, punctuated at longer intervals by something deeper, something that is felt as much as heard, a subsonic pulse that suggests enormous mass moving at a slow but deliberate pace. The grass around you trembles slightly with each pulse. Small creatures, ground-dwelling birds, rodent-like mammals, large insects with wings like stained glass, scatter into the vegetation at the base of the trees and wait there, still and watchful until the trembling passes. Then, over the low ridge of ground ahead of you, the first of them appears. It is a Triceratops, or rather, it is the head of a Triceratops, rising above the ridge with the unhurried inevitability of a moon rising, followed by the great frilled neck, and then the massive body, and then, with a slight delay that seems dramatic but is simply a function of scale, the thick, slow legs carrying the whole tremendous weight of the animal over the ridge and down the gentle slope toward the open grassland. It is not alone. Behind it comes another, and then two more abreast, and then the whole herd in a slow, broad movement that takes several minutes to fully materialize over the ridge, and when it has done so, the grassland before you contains perhaps 30 of the creatures, each one between 7 and 9 tons, each one moving with the patient, ground-consuming stride of an animal that covers enormous distances every day by simply never stopping. You are standing at the edge of the tree line, partially obscured by the shadow of a large cycad, and the herd is moving across the grassland perhaps 100 meters to your left, heading generally southward toward a distant tree line where you can see, even from here, the glint of water, a river or a lake that the herd knows is there, in the way that all herd animals know where the water is, encoded in memory and in the subtle environmental cues that only a mind shaped over millions of years by the necessity of finding water can reliably read. Watching the Triceratops herd is nothing like watching film of large animals, which always carries the slight falsity of the recorded, the sense that what you are seeing is information rather than presence. The presence of these animals is overwhelming not because it is frightening, it is not frightening, but because it is simply so entirely real. The smell of them reaches you on the breeze, warm, hay-like, with something slightly sharp beneath it that might be the oils of their skin or the particular chemistry of their dung, which lies in great dark mounds scattered across the grassland like a map of their recent passage. The smell is not unpleasant. It is the smell of something very alive, of metabolisms running at scale, of enormous bodies processing enormous quantities of vegetation and warmth. The sounds, too, are different in reality from anything you might have imagined. The footfalls, which from a distance sounded like thunder, reveal themselves up close to be something more nuanced. A deep metronomic thud from each foreleg, slightly different in quality from the sound of each hind leg, with a secondary vibration that travels through the ground, and a tertiary sound of grass and earth compressed and released under the weight of each step. There are also softer sounds, the tearing and chewing of vegetation as the animals feed while they walk, a low rumbling that seems to come from the chest cavities of the larger animals, and that you eventually understand is not a vocalization, but simply the sound of very large digestive systems at work, the sound of biology at scale, which is an extraordinarily peaceful sound once you know what it is. The young ones, there are 4 or 5 of them, distinguishable by their smaller size and their tendency to walk very close to the larger animals, in a way that is clearly neither coincidence nor preference, but something closer to instruction, the physical grammar of being young in a world where staying close to size and experience is the basic curriculum of survival. The young ones are curious. One of them, no larger than a small car, pauses in its walking and turns its head toward where you're standing in the shadow of the cycad. The 3 horns on its face are still relatively small, the ones over the eyes barely longer than your forearm, and its frill is a pale, warm orange, which is the colouring it will carry until it reaches adolescence, when it will deepen to the dark reddish-brown of the adults. It looks at you with one large, dark, uncomplicated eye. You do not move, you do not need to move. After a moment that is neither short nor long, but simply the amount of time a young Triceratops needs to determine that something at the edge of its vision is not something requiring either investigation or alarm, the young animal turns back toward its mother and resumes its walking, falling back into the rhythm of the herd with the instinctive ease of a creature for whom the group is both home and compass. You breathe out, slowly. The herd continues its passage across the grassland. You watch for a long time. You are not certain how long, time moving differently here, in this green and unhurried interior, than it moves in the world of clocks and appointments, and things that need to be done. The afternoon light is deepening toward gold by the time the last of the animals has cleared the area, and the grassland is quiet again, marked only by their passing, the compressed circles of grass where they fed, the deep oval impressions of their footsteps, the mounds of dung that will within days be colonized by insects and broken down by the warm wet air, and incorporated back into the soil from which the grass will grow again. Everything returns. This is one of the things this world teaches, patiently and repeatedly, to anyone willing to stay long enough to receive the lesson. The grass returns. The soil absorbs what it is given and produces what is needed. The herd moves on, and the grassland recovers, and then the herd returns, following its seasonal circuit, and the whole process begins again, as it has been beginning again for long enough that the word beginning has become somewhat theoretical. It is all middle, really. All the beautiful, unhurried, self-renewing middle of an ecosystem that has found its equilibrium and is content, as much as anything can be content, to maintain it. You sit down at the base of the cycad. The ground is warm from the afternoon sun and slightly yielding, the thick mat of grass and leaf litter providing a cushion that is better than most of the things you have ever sat on. The sound of the herd is still audible to the south, diminishing as they move further away, and in the diminishing you can hear more clearly the other sounds of the grassland, the wind in the long grass making a sound that is half whisper and half sigh, the calls of insects rising and falling in complex overlapping rhythms, a bird of some kind singing a single phrase from somewhere in the upper branches of a tree not far away. A phrase of 3 notes, descending, that it repeats at intervals as though working out some problem that keeps requiring the same answer. Your back is warm against the cycad's trunk. Your legs are long on the grass in front of you. The sky above the grassland is enormous and moving, clouds building slowly in the north, the kind of clouds that will produce rain by evening, tall and white and full of the particular grandeur of clouds that have never been named for what kind of weather they make because the language for naming clouds has not yet arrived in this world. You watch them build slowly, without urgency. The herd is gone. The afternoon is deep and warm. The 3-note bird is still repeating its descending phrase, and you are very, very still. There is a particular satisfaction in watching a herd of large animals move across open ground. It is not an intellectual satisfaction, not the satisfaction of understanding or of having learned something, but something more physical, more immediate, something that bypasses the reasoning mind and reaches directly into an older part of you, a part that has been watching large animals on open ground for as long as it has existed. Perhaps this is ancestral memory in the loosest sense, the accumulated association, laid down over millions of years of evolution, between the sight of healthy prey animals moving calmly across open ground and the sense that the world is in order, that the ecosystem is functioning as it should, that there is abundance and safety in the vicinity. Whatever its origin, the satisfaction is real, and it is deep, and it has settled into your body over the course of the last half hour like warmth, like the particular physical contentment of a body that has received exactly what it needed, without having known in advance that it needed it. The clouds to the north are building with the patient drama of tropical convective clouds, starting as small white puffs at mid-morning, growing through the heat of the day as the warm air rises from the heated land and encounters the cooler air above and condenses, the cloud tops billowing upward in slow, tremendous explosions of white that look, from below, like the growth of something alive, something that is being fed by the heat of the land and is giving back shade and eventually rain, in the ancient exchange of energy between land and atmosphere that has been running on this planet since it first had both land and atmosphere to participate in the exchange. The clouds do not hurry. They build at exactly the rate the thermodynamics of the situation prescribe, which is slow by human standards and exactly right by the standards of the atmosphere, which is the only standard that applies. A dragonfly-like insect, enormous by the standards of its modern equivalents, with a wingspan perhaps the width of your open hand, has arrived near where you're sitting. It is perched on a grass stem no more than 2 meters away, its wings horizontal and still, its compound eyes registering the grassland in the way that compound eyes register things, not as a unified image but as a mosaic of many slightly different views, each facet of the eye providing a slightly different perspective on the same scene, the whole assembled by the insect's nervous system into something adequate for its purposes, without needing to be the same as what a single lens eye would produce. It is resting. Its wings, which catch the afternoon light in shifting patterns of iridescence as the light angle changes with the moving clouds, are doing nothing right now except existing, which they do very well. You breathe out slowly, one long exhalation that empties your lungs more completely than most of your breathing during the day has done, and then you breathe in, slowly, filling from the bottom, the way the body breathes when it is fully relaxed, and the breath can find its full depth without the constriction of held tension in the muscles of the chest and abdomen. The cycad's trunk is solid and warm behind you. The grass is warm and soft under your legs. The afternoon is going to go on for a long time yet, and the clouds are building slowly, and the 3-note bird is still singing, and the dragonfly-like insect is still resting on its grass stem, and the world is proceeding with the magnificent, unhurried, self-sufficient thoroughness that it always proceeds with when nothing is interfering with it, which is most of the time. Here, in this world, in this afternoon, in this particular configuration of ancient grass and warm sun, and patient clouds, and the distant diminishing sound of the herd that is still, somewhere to the south, going about its enormous and gentle business. The river that runs through the centre of the island's valley is not a river in any hurry. It moves with the particular authority of a waterway that has been moving for long enough to have shaped the land around it on its own terms, cutting the curve of its banks not because anything compelled it to curve, but because the curve was the path of least resistance, and rivers, given enough time, always find the path of least resistance, and follow it with a faithfulness that looks, from a distance, almost like loyalty. The banks here are low and soft, edged with vegetation that grows in the permanently wet soil, with an enthusiasm that the drier ground further back cannot quite match. You have come to the river in the late afternoon, following the sound of it through the interior of the forest for perhaps half an hour, moving through the diminishing light of the under canopy, where the air was cool and smelled of fungus and deep soil and the particular resin of the araucarian trees, until the sound of the water became louder than the sound of the forest, and the light changed and the trees opened and the river appeared, wider than you expected, moving more slowly than you expected, catching the afternoon light in long, broken reflections that rippled upstream as the current carried them down. The near bank is perhaps a metre above the water's surface. Below it, the river is perhaps 1.5 metres deep at the near side and shallower toward the far bank, where a bar of sand and small stones creates a pale, irregular shape just below the surface. On that sandbar, a small crocodilian is lying very still, its body half submerged, its eyes and nostrils just above the water, in the arrangement that crocodilians have maintained almost unchanged for an enormous span of time, because it is an arrangement that works with great efficiency and requires no revision. It has not moved since you arrived. It gives no indication of having noticed you. It is entirely content to be exactly what it is, exactly where it is, for exactly as long as it wishes to be there. Further upstream, perhaps 50 metres, a group of hadrosaurs have come to the river to drink. These are duck-billed animals, moving with the slightly ungainly quality of creatures whose bodies are optimized for eating and walking, rather than for anything more athletic, their broad, flat snouts lowering to the water with an unhurried practicality that makes the act of drinking look like the most natural and settled thing in the world, which, of course, it is. There are perhaps a dozen of them, adults and juveniles mixed, and the sound they make while drinking is both louder and more varied than you would expect. Splashing and grunting and the occasional deeper, resonant call from one of the larger animals that produces a visible ripple in the surrounding vegetation, as though the call has a physical weight. The river accepts all of this, the drinking and the calling and the slow crocodilian and the falling of afternoon light on its surface and the insects that hover above it in their hundreds, tracing patterns above the water that are too complex and too brief to be legible to anything slower than the river's own current. The river carries all of it downstream at the same unhurried pace, the reflections and the disturbed water from the drinking animals, and the small insects that land on its surface and are carried along without much choice in the matter, carries it all southward toward the coast and the sea, and the eventual evaporation and return that is the larger cycle within which the river's own cycle operates. You sit down on the bank, dangling your feet above the water but not quite touching it. The bank's edge is solid beneath you, packed clay with a thin covering of short, tough grass that grows right to the lip of the drop. Below you the water moves in its slow, complex way, not smooth on the surface, because no river is ever truly smooth, but moving in those slightly irregular patterns of a current that encounters small variations in the riverbed and responds to them, eddying and surging gently, the surface catching and releasing the light in patterns that are almost hypnotic when you watch them long enough. The hadrosaurs have finished drinking. They move away from the river with the same unhurried practicality with which they arrived, heading back into the forest in a loose group, the juveniles among them moving with slightly more energy than the adults, more willing to deviate from the direct path, more likely to pause and investigate something at the base of a tree or the edge of a fern before being recalled to the group by a low, patient sound from one of the larger animals. They disappear into the tree line and the sounds of their passage diminish, and then the river is quiet again, or as quiet as a river ever is, which is to say full of its own sound but free from the sounds of anything else. The crocodilian on the sandbar has not moved, or rather it has moved in ways too subtle to be certain of. Perhaps the angle of its head has shifted fractionally, perhaps one of its legs is now in a slightly different position, but it appears motionless in the way that things appear motionless when they are moving more slowly than your eye can register. It is, in its stillness, its absolute commitment to the economy of motion, something close to a meditation, something that has perfected the art of doing nothing at precisely the right moment and for precisely the right duration. There is something instructive in it. The light has shifted while you've been sitting here. It has moved, as afternoon light always moves, toward the warmer end of the spectrum, and the river now catches it in amber rather than silver, and the trees on the far bank are beginning to develop that particular glow of late afternoon when the light comes from too low and too oblique an angle to illuminate from above, but instead illuminates from the side, catching the texture of bark and leaf, and making every surface suddenly, briefly, more itself than it was an hour ago. The forest on the far bank has gone from simply green to 50 different greens, each one distinct and particular, each one briefly illuminated before the light moves on. A fish rises somewhere in the middle of the river, a brief, circular disturbance on the surface, the slight glint of silver, and then gone, back into the opaque brown-green depth of the river's interior, where things move without your knowing. The circle of disturbance expands and is carried downstream and is indistinguishable from the river's general movement within a few seconds. The fish has eaten something. The surface of the river has registered this and then forgotten it. The river continues. You feel, sitting on this bank above this river in this ancient world, that you understand something about time that is difficult to articulate, and that would, if you tried to articulate it in your waking life, probably come out slightly wrong or slightly thin. But here, in the particular state of consciousness that is neither quite waking nor quite sleeping, it seems clear and whole and unutterably simple. Time is not a line. It is not even a cycle, though it contains cycles. It is something more like this river, moving always in one direction, carrying everything with it, shaped by what it moves through, and in turn shaping what it moves through, never the same in any two moments, and never not recognizably itself. The water that was here when you sat down is not here now, but the river is here now, exactly as it was then, and will be here when you have long since stood and moved on, carrying whatever you carry, southward toward the sea. The sun is lower now. The crocodilian on the sandbar has finally moved. Not dramatically, only the slow pivot of its body as it angles itself to catch the last warmth of the day at a better angle. The insects above the water are thickening as the light diminishes, the evening species emerging to replace the afternoon species in a succession too gradual to observe directly, but too complete to ignore. From somewhere upstream, the sound of the hadrosaurs comes back briefly, a low resonant call carried by the river valley's acoustics from further away than you might expect. And then it is gone again, absorbed into the general green quiet of the approaching evening. The river moves on, you breathe, everything's as it should be, and you are part of it, and you are at rest. The river has been flowing here for longer than this island has had its present shape. The river's ancestors, earlier rivers that occupied similar valleys in this landscape during earlier geological periods, flowed across ground that has since been reshaped by volcanic activity and by the slow movement of tectonic forces, carrying the water of their respective eras toward whatever sea was available to receive them. The water itself is far older than any individual river or any individual sea, water that has been in the atmosphere and in the ocean and in the ice and in the rock and in the bodies of organisms and in the air again, cycling through the states available to it on this planet since the planet was young enough to have had water arrive on it and stay. The water moving past your feet right now has been in many places. Some of it was in the ocean last month, evaporated from the surface by the sun, carried by the wind over the interior and precipitated as rain on the island's uplands, draining through the soil and the rock and emerging in springs that feed this river. Some of it has been in the soil for longer, decades perhaps, slowly moving through the aquifer that underlies the island's geological structure, moving so slowly that its journey from where it entered the ground to where it is now emerging into the river is measured in years rather than weeks. Some small fraction of the water in this river has been here, in this specific watershed, cycling between rain and river and ocean and rain for so long that the notion of tracking its individual history becomes meaningless. It is ancient. It is local. It is here now at your feet, warm and brown and carrying its small cargo of clay and organic matter southward toward the sea, and then it is gone, and another portion of the same ancient water takes its place, and the river continues, as the river always continues, as everything here continues, in the patient and unhurried way of things that have been continuing for longer than anything has been counting. Dusk in a prehistoric forest is a different event from dusk anywhere you have experienced it in the modern world. It is longer, for one thing. The transition from full afternoon to full night taking place over a period of perhaps 2 hours, moving through so many distinct stages of light that each one seems to have its own character, its own specific temperature, its own particular way of changing the look and feel of every surface. First the gold hour, when everything that faces west is illuminated and everything that faces east is in a shadow that's still warm and detailed. Then the blue hour, when the direct light is gone but the sky is still bright, and the forest exists in a generalized, even illumination that makes everything look slightly unreal, slightly painted. Then the deepening blue, which becomes purple at the margins, which becomes the true dark that is not yet night, but is no longer evening. You are moving slowly through the lower levels of the forest. The ground here is soft and gives slightly under each step, the thick layer of decomposed vegetation and clay absorbing the impact of your feet in a way that makes your walking almost silent. The tree roots, vast and complex, surface regularly from the soil in buttressed tangles that create small alcoves and chambers at ground level, and in these alcoves the moisture concentrates, and the moss grows thicker, and in the thickest moss small organisms go about their small essential business in the complete absence of anything resembling hurry. The forest at dusk is becoming noisier, paradoxically, not with the sounds of large animals which are mostly settling and quieting, but with the sounds of insects and small creatures that are most active in the transition between day and night. Cicada-like organisms, though not quite the cicadas you know, close enough to recognize but different enough to notice, begin their evening chorus in the middle canopy, producing a sound like static electricity that rises and falls and rises and becomes, after a few minutes of listening, less like noise and more like texture. A sonic texture that the forest wears in the evening the way it wears the mist in the morning, as a natural attribute rather than an interruption. A pterosaur, smaller than the ones you have seen over the lagoon, with a wingspan perhaps the width of your outstretched arms, is navigating the lower edge of the canopy above you, moving through the gaps between branches with a precision that seems implausible given the speed of its movement and the density of the forest. It is hunting the insects that have been disturbed by the cooling air into movement, and its hunting is so efficient and so fluid that it looks less like predation and more like dance, a negotiation between the flying body and the air and the obstacles, worked out and reworked in fractions of a second, every adjustment immediate and exact. It does not see you, or it sees you and dismisses you as irrelevant, which amounts to the same thing. It passes overhead and is gone into the trees. The temperature has dropped perceptibly in the last 30 minutes. Not unpleasantly. The warmth of the day is stored in the earth, and in the vegetation, and in the air that is trapped within the canopy, and it releases itself slowly, so that even as the light diminishes, the warmth persists, but differently, more intimate now, less the broad warmth of direct sunlight, and more the ambient warmth of a space that holds the day's heat in its walls. You are warm. Your body knows it, and has relaxed around the knowledge, the muscles of your shoulders and jaw and hands releasing their habitual tension in response to warmth and the absence of threat and the particular quality of air that this forest has produced by breathing for a very long time. In a clearing ahead of you, created by the falling of an enormous tree, whose trunk now lies across the clearing floor in a state of magnificent gradual decomposition, serving as a raised highway for dozens of species that prefer their travel to be dry and elevated, a family of Ankylosaurus are settling for the night. They are low, broad, heavily armoured animals, and their armour, the bony plates and ridges that cover their backs and sides and the great clubbed tail, catches the last of the blue evening light with an almost metallic quality, as though each animal is wearing something forged rather than grown. They arrange themselves with a practicality that seems at odds with their formidable appearance. nestled close together, slightly overlapping, sharing warmth the way all social animals share warmth when the temperature drops, finding the arrangement that maximizes contact and minimizes exposure with the unconscious efficiency of bodies that have been doing this for long enough that doing otherwise would feel strange. The juveniles are the last to settle. They are restless in the way of the young. Not anxious, exactly, but not yet finished with the day, still processing the day's inputs with the biological busyness of developing systems. One of them, barely the length of your body, has found something of interest near the base of the fallen tree. A beetle, perhaps, or a deposit of clay that has the right mineral content for something the young animal's body needs. And it investigates with its blunt snout, nudging and sniffing, before it is collected by the gentle but unmistakable pressure of an adult body and guided back to the warmth of the group. It submits immediately, the way all the young eventually submit to warmth when they are tired enough, folding its small armoured body against the larger one beside it and going still. The clearing has gone quiet now. The blue hour has deepened into the purple hour, and the purple hour is becoming the dark. The stars, and there are extraordinary numbers of them here, in this sky unaffected by any source of artificial light, anywhere on or near the island, are beginning to appear in the patches of visible sky above the clearing. Not yet many, and not yet bright. Just the first few, the ones brave enough to declare themselves before full dark, the ones whose light has been travelling long enough that even the remaining blue in the sky cannot quite drown them out. They will multiply. They always multiply, given time, given the patience to wait for full dark. You find a place to sit against the warm bark of the fallen tree. The bark is rough under your hand, but not uncomfortably so, and the warmth it holds is extraordinary. Not the warmth of something heated from outside, but the warmth of a system that has been running its own biochemical processes for centuries, the stored energy of a lifetime of sunlight and water and carbon dioxide converted into wood, now releasing itself very gradually as the wood begins its long process of returning to the soil it once drew from. Everything returns. Every form of energy finds its way back eventually. The Ankylosaurus family is breathing. You can hear it from where you sit, the slow, regular rhythm of large animals in the first stages of sleep, the breath deeper and more audible than when they were awake and moving, the exhalations carrying a warmth you can feel on your face when the breeze turns in your direction. This is what safety sounds like, in the most fundamental biological sense. The sound of large bodies breathing slowly in the dark. Your body recognizes it the way it recognizes the sound of a heartbeat close to your ear, the way it recognizes warmth and sufficient food, and the absence of threat, as information, processed without words, that says, here, now, you are not in danger. Here, now, you can let go. The stars are multiplying above you. The cicada chorus in the canopy has modulated from its evening urgency to a slower, more sustained rhythm, the sound of the night settling in. A last pterosaur crosses the patch of sky above the clearing, its silhouette unmistakable against the deepening indigo. The swept-back crest, the long bill, the angled wings moving with slow, deliberate strokes that carry it northward with an efficiency that makes flight look simple, look obvious, look like the natural consequence of being shaped correctly for the air you move through. You are breathing slowly. The fallen tree is warm at your back. The Ankylosaurus family breathes their steady rhythm a few meters away. The stars are multiplying. The forest settles around you into its nighttime configuration. Quieter than the day, different in kind rather than simply in degree. A new set of systems coming online as the day systems power down. The whole ecosystem shifting gears with the practiced smoothness of something that has been doing this particular shift for longer than the word practice could possibly contain. And you, sitting at the base of a fallen tree in the deepening dark of a Cretaceous evening, are exactly as settled as everything around you, breathing exactly as slowly, holding exactly as little tension in your body as an animal that is exactly as safe as you are right now. The rain begins not with a sound, but with a smell. Before the first drop has reached the forest floor, before anything has fallen, the air changes, a sharpening, a deepening, the particular scent that is called petrichor in the language of a civilization that has not yet arrived, but which exists as a simple sensory fact in every ecosystem that has ever had both soil and the possibility of rain. It is the smell of expectation. It is the smell of the earth preparing to receive what is coming, which is water, which is life, which is the thing that everything here is built around and toward and because of. You smell it, and you understand, the way the animals around you understand, not through any conscious reasoning but through the body's own intelligence, which is older than reasoning and in many ways more reliable, that the rain is coming. The Ankylosaurus family, already settled for the night, makes a collective adjustment, a slight tightening of the group, a shifting of the larger bodies to better shelter the smaller ones, an almost imperceptible repositioning that nonetheless places the most vulnerable members of the family in the most protected positions, in the centre, under the overhang of the two largest animals' armoured backs. The first drops arrive at the canopy and announce themselves against the broad leaves with a sound that is initially sporadic, a tap here, a tap there, at irregular intervals that nonetheless carry the promise of regularity to come. Then more drops, and the intervals shorten, and the sound of each drop is joined by the sound of the drop running off the leaf it has landed on, gathering itself at the leaf's lowest point and falling to the next leaf below, the sound changing slightly with each level it descends through the canopy as the drop gains mass from the surfaces it encounters. By the time the water reaches the ground, each drop that falls from the canopy's lowest leaves is a small stream rather than a single raindrop, carrying with it the collected moisture of a dozen brief encounters on its way down. Under the canopy, the rain creates a sound like nothing else, not the sharp, direct percussion of rain on an open surface, but a complex, layered sound of arrival and transmission, and dripping and running, every leaf a surface with its own response, every branch and trunk a channel for the water's inevitable downward journey. The whole forest becoming a kind of instrument played by the rain, producing music that has no score and no composer, and no audience, and no purpose beyond the fact of its own beautiful occurrence. You're not getting wet, or not very wet. The canopy, even at this level, is dense enough that the rain is transformed long before it reaches you, arriving not as drops but as a general increase in humidity, a slight cool dampness that settles on exposed skin and is not unpleasant, is in fact cooling and refreshing in exactly the way the warm, close air of the pre-rainforest required refreshing. You tilt your head back and feel it on your face, and it is perfectly fine. Everything is perfectly fine. The forest sounds change with the rain. The cicada chorus, which had settled into its nighttime register, adjusts again. Some species fall silent, others intensify, and through the combined sound of rain and insects and rain on leaves comes a new element: frogs. There are not many species of frogs in this world, and they are not the frogs you know from the modern world, but they are recognisably frog-like in the most important quality of frogness, which is the willingness to celebrate rain vocally and at length. Their calls are simple and repetitive and carry through the wet air with the clarity of sounds that have been optimised by selection for precisely these acoustic conditions, and they overlap and complement each other in a way that is more than accidental, that has the quality of structure without the weight of intention. The rain intensifies briefly, a squall within the storm, a heavier band of water that makes the canopy roar for perhaps 3 minutes, with a sound like applause, like white noise, like the static between frequencies, and then eases again, returning to the steadier, more sustainable rhythm it will maintain for most of the night. In the brief intensity, the Ankylosaurus family pulls together even tighter, the sound of their breathing changing slightly under the pressure of the rain, and then, as the rain eases, returning to the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. The water is running on the ground now. Streams are forming in the channels between tree roots, filling the depressions in the soil, overflowing one natural basin into another in a quiet, purposeful movement toward the lowest points of the clearing and then beyond, toward the river, toward the sea, toward the sky and back. The water is moving through the ecosystem the way everything moves through ecosystems, not in straight lines, not efficiently in the engineering sense, but completely, touching everything, leaving nothing untouched, participating in every exchange that is available to participate in on its journey. There is a particular quality to the air inside a forest during rain at night. It is both enclosed and infinite. The canopy above creates a ceiling that makes the space feel intimate, human-scaled, like a room, while the darkness beyond the trees in every direction suggests an extension of that room in every direction without limit. The smell is extraordinary. That deepened petrichor, the released compounds of bark and soil and leaf, the ozone carried on the air from the storm, and underneath all of it the permanent bass note of the forest's own respiration, the slow exhalation of millions of leaves processing the night's chemistry, which is the chemical basis for the air you're breathing right now, for the oxygen in every breath you take. You have found a place under a particularly dense canopied tree, whose spreading branches create a radius of relative dryness, and you are sitting with your back against its trunk, watching the rain on the clearing. The fallen tree where the Ankylosaurus family is sleeping is perhaps 10 meters away, and in the darkness, which is not total darkness, because the rain has not extinguished the stars but only veiled them, and the veil itself produces a faint diffuse luminosity, you can see the shapes of them, low and broad and still, breathing. Occasionally one of the animals shifts slightly in its sleep, the movement accompanied by the creak of armoured plates adjusting, and the soft sound of vegetation compressed under new weight, then stillness again. The rain on the leaves is a constant. It is white noise in the original sense. Not recorded white noise, not synthesized white noise, but the actual complex sound of water striking a million different surfaces at slightly different angles, with slightly different forces, producing a randomized acoustic feel that covers every other sound without overwhelming it, that creates a kind of sonic privacy, a gentle masking of the specific that allows the mind to release its grip on individual sounds and simply rest in the general. You have been resting in it for some time. You might have been resting in it for a long time. It is difficult to be certain, because time is moving differently here, in the warm dark under this tree and this rain in this ancient world. The rain continues, the forest breathes, the Ankylosaurus family sleeps, the frogs call from the wet margins of the clearing with their simple, repeating celebrations. The river, somewhere to the south, is running higher now, carrying the red clay of its banks and the small debris of the forest floor southward, with a slightly increased urgency that will return to normal when the rain stops, and the overnight sky clears and the stars return to their full brightness, and the world is still again. All of this is happening. All of it is real, in the sense that anything dreamed is real, in the sense that anything truly imagined is real, in the sense that you are here and the rain is here and the sleeping animals are here and the ancient forest is here, and all of it is exactly as it should be, and you are exactly as safe as it is possible to be, and your breathing is as slow as the breathing of the forest floor, and your eyes are as closed as the sky above the cloud. The sound of rain on a forest canopy at night is one of the most ancient sounds available to any consciousness capable of receiving it. Every lineage of land animal has ancestors that experienced rain on forest canopies at night, has ancestors that sheltered under vegetation and listened to the water arriving at the level above them and processing downward through the layers, arriving at the ground level transformed and reduced and steady. And those ancestors survived those nights and carried forward the genetic heritage that made them capable of surviving, which heritage included whatever it is that a nervous system does in response to that sound that allows the body to relax into the rain rather than contracting against it. The rain is not a threat. The rain has never been a threat to a creature dry enough and warm enough to receive it as sound rather than soaking. The rain is for such a creature precisely what it sounds like in the dark under the canopy, old and vast and regular and safe. Your breathing has matched the rain. This happened gradually, without intention, the way all the body's best calibrations happen, as a natural consequence of being in a particular environment for long enough, of receiving the rain's rhythm for long enough that the rhythm has entered you through the ears and found its way into the breathing, which is now as steady and as unhurried as the rain itself, which is very steady and very unhurried, which is exactly how the rain needs to be to do the work it came here to do. You are in the rain's rhythm. The rain is in yours. The forest breathes around both of you. The frogs celebrate in the wet margins. The Ankylosaurus family sleeps its thick armoured sleep. The night is long and dark and wet and entirely fine, and you are part of it, and you are part of the forest, and you are part of the island, and the island is part of the world, and the world turns slowly through the dark toward the dawn that is coming, as it always comes, carrying the light back to all of this as a gift that will be received, as it is always received, with the simple, complete, wordless gratitude of things that know what they need and know when they are receiving it. The rain has passed. The clouds that carried it have moved on toward the coast, and the sky above the valley is clear now and extraordinary. the kind of sky that only exists far from any artificial light source, with a density of stars that seems impossible until you are seeing it, and then seems not only possible but inevitable, the natural consequence of a universe that has been making stars for nearly as long as it has been making anything. The Milky Way is a broad, luminous band across the centre of this sky. Not the faint smear it appears through modern atmosphere, but a genuine structure, a visible architecture of light, lanes of brighter and darker material alternating across its width. The whole thing giving the impression not of a flat backdrop, but of a space with depth, with interior, with a distance behind it that recedes without limit. You are standing in the valley, which is a long gradual depression between two ridges of volcanic rock, and the ground beneath your feet is wet from the rain and smells of everything that rain releases from soil, minerals and organic compounds, and something that is almost the smell of time itself, if time had a smell, which it might, in the sense that the accumulated decomposition of 65 million years of biology has a chemistry that is specific and recognizable and unlike anything else. The grass around your feet is wet and cold and pressing gently against your ankles. The sky above you is warm with starlight. The valley is not empty at night. This is the first thing you learn, standing here in the dark, that a landscape which appeared to belong to the day is conducting its own parallel existence in the dark, populated by different creatures, illuminated by different light, governed by different rhythms but continuous with the daylight world in all the ways that matter. The same soil, the same air, the same water moving through the same channels toward the same sea. The night world is not a different world, it is the same world turned to a different page. Near the northern end of the valley, perhaps 200 metres away, a pair of Parasaurolophus, the crest-headed hadrosaurs whose hollow cranial crests function as resonating chambers for their calls, are moving through the long grass with the slow, swaying gait of large animals at ease. You can see them by the starlight, their silhouettes dark against the slightly luminous wetness of the grass around them, their crests making them instantly recognizable in silhouette even without detail, the characteristic curved projection extending behind the skull like a gesture towards something behind them, something in the past or the future, or simply in another direction from the one they're currently looking. They are not calling tonight. They are moving in silence or in a quiet that is almost silence. The soft sound of large bodies displacing wet grass, the occasional low exhalation, the muted percussion of hoofed feet on soft ground. The valley has its own acoustics at night. The ridges on either side channel the sound and create a natural amphitheatre effect, so that sounds from the far end of the valley are audible here with a clarity that the open daylight air would not produce. This means you hear, with startling distinctness, the call that comes from somewhere on the eastern ridge, a series of low, rhythmic sounds that are not quite vocalization and not quite percussion, but something between, something that seems to be produced by both the throat and the body simultaneously, a resonant, chest-deep sequence that travels down the ridge and across the valley and arrives at your ears already intimate, already close, as though the sound was meant specifically for you. The Parasaurolophus at the northern end of the valley have stopped moving. Their heads are raised, those extraordinary crests outlined against the stars, and they are listening with the complete full-body attention that prey animals devote to anything they cannot immediately identify. Every muscle slightly tensed, every sense directed toward the source of the sound, the calculation running constantly in the background of their awareness, known or unknown, near or far, moving toward or moving away. The calculation takes perhaps 20 seconds, during which the valley is entirely still. Then the sound comes again from the ridge, slightly different in quality this time, slightly lower, and the Parasaurolophus lower their heads and resume their slow movement through the grass. Known, not a threat, continue. The sky is doing something subtle and extraordinary. The stars at the western horizon are beginning to dim very slightly, not because dawn is coming, which is hours away, but because the moon is rising, sending its light ahead of itself to soften the western sky before the moon itself crests the ridge and fills the valley with its particular silver. You watch the softening proceed for perhaps 10 minutes before the moon's edge appears above the volcanic rock of the eastern ridge, just a sliver at first, then a crescendo, then the full disk, which is larger here in the pre-industrial world and seems enormous suspended above the ridgeline as it rises. Moonlight in a wet valley is a specific and beautiful thing. Every wet surface catches it and multiplies it. The grass, still damp from the rain, becomes a field of small individual mirrors, each blade catching and returning a fractional reflection of the moon's light, so that the whole valley floor seems to shimmer with a cold, silver luminosity that is nothing like daylight but is a different kind of seeing, a different register of visibility, one that reveals form and mass and movement without revealing colour, without revealing the fine detail that daylight insists on. Everything in moonlight is essentialized. The Parasaurolophus, moving slowly through the silver grass, are dark and graceful and simple, their specific biological complexity reduced by the light to pure form, and the pure form is beautiful. You have been walking slowly southward through the valley, following no particular path but moving in the general direction of the southern end where the valley widens, and a stand of tall, wide-spaced Araucarian trees creates a cathedral-like space of vertical trunks and high, spreading canopy. You reach it as the moon has climbed high enough to send its light at a lower angle through the gaps in the canopy, producing pools of silver on the forest floor that shift slowly as the branches above move in the light breeze that has come in with the clearing of the clouds. You sit down in one of the silver pools. The ground is still damp, but there is a natural cushion of moss and leaf litter here that holds the moisture without releasing it immediately, and sitting in it is like sitting on a very firm, slightly cool mattress, supportive, substantial, at a temperature that is neither warm enough to be comfortable nor cold enough to be uncomfortable, but exactly at the boundary between those two states where the body's own warmth begins to assert itself and settle the question. The valley breathes around you. The moonlight moves in its slow glacial drift as the earth turns beneath it. The Parasaurolophus, which have moved further south, are somewhere in the dark beyond the tree line, their location marked by occasional soft sounds of movement that reach you through the still air. The insects of the nighttime chorus, different species from the day's insects tuned to different frequencies, active at different temperatures, continue their complex overlapping registrations of existence. A nocturnal pterosaur, pale in the moonlight, crosses the open sky above the valley in a long, shallow glide, and disappears behind the western ridge without having made a sound. This is the Midnight Valley. This is the world at its most essential, reduced by darkness to what it is rather than how it appears, stripped of the clarifying excess of daylight, until what remains is form and sound, and the feeling of being held inside an enormous breathing system that has been doing this for longer than you can imagine, and will be doing this long after you have returned to whatever world you came from. You are a guest here, as all living things are guests in the world they inhabit, and the world is a good host, and the night is long and the moon is bright and you are already halfway between here and sleep, which is fine, which is exactly right, which is where you are always going. The southern end of the island is different from the interior. The landscape here has been shaped less by the volcanic rock of the island's origins, and more by the slow, patient work of water and time. The waves that have, over thousands of years, undercut the cliffs and sorted the material they released into the beaches that curve between the headlands, and the rain that has, over longer periods, carved the small valleys and gullies that channel from the high interior down to the coast. The result is a landscape of greater variety and smaller scale than the broad interior. Pocket beaches, sea caves, rocky promontories, tidal pools that hold, in their small contained worlds, the most extraordinary concentrations of life. You have come here following the sound of the sea, which you have been able to hear since leaving the Midnight Valley, first as a faint suggestion, a rhythmic bass note beneath everything else, and then gradually more distinct and present until now, standing at the edge of the last belt of coastal vegetation, you can see the water itself, a broad, luminous plain under the moon, moving in long swells that arrive at the coast with the unhurried authority of things that have been travelling for enormous distances and have arrived with plenty of momentum to spare. The beach below you is perhaps 30 metres wide and almost perfectly crescent-shaped, with low headlands of dark volcanic rock at each end that catch the waves and deflect them inward, creating a protected, relatively calm area of water within the curve of the beach where the swells diminish before reaching the shore. The sand is dark, not the white or golden sand of tropical beaches in the modern world, but a dark grey-black volcanic sand that absorbs the moonlight rather than reflecting it, so the beach is a dark curve between the luminous water and the pale moon-silvered vegetation above. At the water's edge, where each small wave reaches and retreats, There is a line of wet sand that catches the moonlight briefly, brilliantly, and then goes dark again as the water retreats. Something is on the beach. Several somethings, in fact. Large, low shapes arranged along the upper edge of the beach where the sand is driest, near the base of the vegetation. They are not moving, or moving very slightly, and in the moonlight their shapes are unclear, broad and low and irregularly rounded, like boulders that have been arranged with slightly more regularity than boulders typically achieve. They are not boulders. As you watch, one of them shifts, the movement accompanied by a soft, leathery sound, and you understand these are sea turtles, enormous by the standards of their modern descendants, come ashore to lay their eggs in the sand above the tide line, as sea turtles have been doing on beaches like this for a very long time, and will continue to do for a very long time after this night. The turtles are uninterested in you. They have a task, and the task is old, and the task is absorbing, and everything else in their environment that does not directly threaten the task is simply information filed under not relevant and moved past. You watch from above as the nearest turtle, perhaps 1.5 meters long, her shell wide and deeply curved, her flippers leaving wide, paddle-shaped prints in the dry sand as she moves, completes the digging of her nest cavity with the methodical patience of a creature that does not have a concept of being in a hurry, because there has never been a selective advantage to having such a concept, and the work gets done regardless. The work takes a long time. The moon has moved a perceptible distance across the sky by the time the nearest turtle has finished her nest and covered it, and is beginning her return to the water. Her movement back down the beach is laboured, the sand is heavy and loose, and her flippers, optimised for swimming, are less than ideal for this kind of horizontal travel. But there is no impatience in her, no frustration, only the same methodical application of available force to the necessary task, one flipper and then the other, the whole enormous body moving in the direction of the water with a slowness that is somehow entirely appropriate, entirely right, entirely at the pace things need to be at for this particular sequence of events to unfold correctly. She reaches the water's edge. The first small wave reaches her and washes over her shell, and she pauses for a moment, or what seems like a pause, though it may simply be the moment when the water's arrival changes the calculation of how to move forward, and then she is in the water and the water has her, and she is transformed. What was laboured on land becomes effortless in the sea. The flippers that pushed awkwardly through loose sand now pull through the water, with the quiet power of a creature that is completely in its element, and within seconds she is beyond the wave break, beyond the inner calm of the beach cove, and moving southward into the open sea, in the long, strong strokes of an animal that knows exactly where it is going, and has done this journey more times than it could count, if counting were something it had occasion to do. The other turtles continue their work. Some are still digging, some have already covered their nests and are resting before the return journey. One has not yet begun. She's moving slowly along the upper beach, investigating with some part of her ancient sensory apparatus the suitability of different locations, moving 2 meters in one direction, and then 2 meters back and then diagonally, and then again horizontally, working out in the patient way of an organism whose decisions are made by systems older than conscious choice exactly where the right place is. Eventually she stops. She begins to dig. You have come down to the beach while watching the turtles, following the path that the coastal vegetation allows, a narrow track through the low, salt-tolerant plants that fringe the beach, and you are now sitting on a shelf of volcanic rock at the base of the northern headland, perhaps 10 meters from the nearest turtle, which has not acknowledged your presence by even the smallest adjustment of its behaviour. The rock beneath you is still warm from the day's sun. The dark volcanic stone absorbs heat readily and releases it slowly, so even now, in the small hours of the night, the rock is warmer than the air around it by several degrees, and you can feel this warmth through your clothing, and it is extraordinary. The sea is making a sound that is nothing like the sound of a single wave, and everything like the sound of 10,000 years of waves, a continuous, complex, layered sound in which individual waves are audible but not dominant, where the general pattern is more prominent than any specific instance, where the rhythm is both perfectly regular and never exactly repeated, where the overall effect is that of something that is happening right now, and has always been happening and will always be happening, which is perhaps the most accurate description of the sea that it is possible to give. The waves arrive, the waves depart, The beach holds the memory of each wave in its smooth surface for a few seconds and then releases it as the next wave arrives. The sea continues. Above you, the stars are completing their slow nightly arc toward the west. The moon has set behind the western ridge while you were watching the turtles. You did not notice the exact moment of its setting, which is usually how the moon sets when you are paying attention to other things. And the sky's fully dark now, the stars at their maximum density and brightness in the moonless hours before dawn. The Milky Way has turned from its overhead position to a diagonal and new constellations, formations that do not exist in the sky above the modern world because the relative motion of the stars has shifted everything over the intervening millions of years, stand at the zenith. You do not know their shapes or names. No one has given them shapes or names, but they are beautiful in their unnamed state. Perhaps more beautiful for having no story attached to them, no mythology to carry, just light arriving across a distance so enormous that the word enormous is not adequate. Arriving on the dark beach where you're sitting, warm, still, listening to the sea. A turtle is returning to the water nearby. Her path takes her within a few meters of where you're sitting, and as she passes you can hear her clearly. The sound of her shell against the sand. The breathing of a creature working hard in an environment that is not its best medium, the small sounds of her determination. Then the water meets her, and she is home, and the sea opens to her and closes behind her, and she is gone southward, into the Pacific of a world that has not yet given that ocean that name, into the dark and luminous depths where she will spend the next years of her long unhurried life before the deep biological imperative brings her back to this beach, to this sand, to the precise location she has returned to every season of her adult life, and will return to every season until she cannot. The beach is still, the sea continues. You are warm, you are still, you are very nearly asleep. If you are drifting now, let yourself go. Subscribe so the next story is waiting when you return. Sleep well. There is an animal on this island that you have not yet seen directly, only felt at a distance through the trembling of the ground and the subtle disturbance of the vegetation at the edges of its passage. You have known it was there the way you know certain things in this world, not through evidence assembled and reasoned over, but through a more immediate kind of knowing. The way a room knows it contains something large even in the dark, through the displacement of air and the quality of sound and the sense of mass nearby that does not require sight to confirm. The animal is a sauropod. It is the largest creature on this island, and possibly the largest creature you have ever been this close to in any form of waking or dreaming. You find it at first light, or rather, you find the place where it has been standing, which is the discovery that precedes the discovery of the animal itself. The place is marked as clearly as anything has ever been marked. 4 depressions in the soft earth of the forest floor, each one a perfect oval about 1.5 meters long and perhaps 50 centimeters deep, arranged in the pattern of the creature's feet. Between the depressions, the grass and low vegetation has been flattened in the pattern of something very heavy at rest, and around the perimeter of this flattened area, branches of the surrounding trees have been broken or bent at a height of perhaps 4 meters. The animal has been here recently. The broken branches are still pale and fresh where the wood was exposed. The depressions have not yet begun to fill with water from the night's rain. You follow the trail, which is not difficult to follow. An animal this size creates a trail the way rivers create channels, through the simple application of more force than the landscape can resist. Northward through the forest, along a path where the undergrowth has been cleared or crushed and the lowest branches of the larger trees broken or stripped, toward a large clearing where, according to what you can hear through the trees, something is eating. The sound of the eating is extraordinary. Not violent, not mechanical, but huge, in the way that everything about this animal is huge. The slow, thorough sound of an enormous quantity of vegetation being stripped from high branches and processed in a mouth that could accommodate a small car. The clearing is actually the meeting point of 2 forest edges, a natural open space where a slight change in the underlying geology has produced different soil conditions, and therefore a different community of plants, shorter, more open, with a section of higher canopy on the north side where the trees are some of the largest on the island. It is in the canopy of these trees that the sauropod is feeding. You see it from the southern edge of the clearing, and the first thing you understand, seeing it, is that your sense of scale has been inadequate. The creature is taller than the trees it is feeding in. Its neck, which curves from a body that is somewhere in the northern tree line and therefore not yet fully visible to you, rises to a height that is simply wrong is not the right word. Impossible is not right either. The right word is probably extraordinary, in the original sense of that word, meaning outside of the ordinary, meaning something that ordinary categories do not quite contain. The neck is long and gradual and curves with a slight lateral swing as the head moves from branch to branch, sweeping in a slow arc that takes it from one feeding point to another, stripping each one with an efficiency that is, in its way, elegant, leaving the bare branch and moving on without hesitation, without looking back, the whole sequence having a quality of smooth, practiced inevitability that makes watching it deeply restful. The head, when you can see it directly, is small in proportion to the neck, which is small in proportion to the body, a series of diminishing scales that is somehow perfectly balanced, in the way that all things shaped by natural selection over sufficient time achieve a kind of balance that can be called elegant without overstating anything. The body of the animal is not fully visible to you. The southern tree line obscures its hindquarters and much of its midsection, and you can only see the forequarters and the base of the neck emerging from the trees and curving upward into the higher canopy above the clearing. But even what you can see is enough to convey the essential fact of the creature's size, which is not just a matter of measurement, but of presence. The way the light around it seems to change, the way the air near it feels different, the way the ground responds to its weight with a vibration you can feel in your chest at this distance, a subsonic pulse like the deepest note of an instrument you have never heard before. You are sitting very still at the southern edge of the clearing. You have been still for long enough that the small creatures of the clearing's ecology have resumed their normal activities around you. A group of Troodon-like dinosaurs, quick and bright-eyed, are investigating the base of a large cycad on the far side of the clearing with the intense focused curiosity of animals for whom curiosity is a survival strategy. They are perhaps knee-high, bipedal, and they move with the nervous precision of birds, which is no accident, their ancestry and the ancestry of birds being more tangled and close than a casual inspection of their respective forms would suggest. The Troodon-like animals are being careful about the presence of the sauropod. They give it a wide berth as they move across the clearing, not because the enormous animal poses them any threat. The sauropod is as uninterested in them as a mountain is uninterested in the birds that nest on its slopes, but because very large animals produce effects even without intention, and the instinct to account for those effects, to maintain a margin of safety around them, has proven useful enough over a sufficient number of generations that it has become reflexive. The Troodon move in the arc that gives the greatest clearance, and pass the sauropod's vicinity without incident, and continue their investigation of the cycad's base. The morning light is strengthening as you watch. The clearing fills with the golden horizontal light of early morning, and the sauropod's flank, where the sun catches it through a gap in the tree line, is revealed in extraordinary detail. The individual scales catching the light at slightly different angles, the texture of the skin complex and regular, and scaled to the animal's own enormous standard, each scale larger than your hand, but creating overall a surface that, at distance, looks almost smooth, almost fine-grained, the way sand on a beach looks smooth from above but reveals its texture the closer you get. The animal has not acknowledged you. You are below the threshold of its concern, too small, too still, too far away, too irrelevant to its current priorities, which are the leaves of the high canopy and the slow, patient work of consuming enough of them to fuel a body that burns at a rate your metabolism cannot meaningfully compare itself to. You are part of the clearing's background, as the trees are, as the small Troodon are, as the morning light is, and this is not an insult, it is a gift. To be irrelevant to something this large is to be invisible, and to be invisible in a world this ancient and this complete is a kind of privilege. The privilege of witnessing without disturbing, of being present without being a presence, of seeing the world as it is when nothing is performing for anything else. The sauropod lifts its head between feeding strokes, just briefly, the neck arching in a long, slow curve that brings the head up and back and slightly to one side, the nostrils flaring as the animal does what all animals do intermittently, regardless of their size, pays attention to the air, reads what the air carries, assesses whether the information in the air is relevant or can be set aside. The head pauses at the top of this arc for perhaps 5 seconds. Then it descends again, the neck curving back in the opposite direction, and the feeding resumes. You breathe out slowly. The morning is well established now. The clearing is bright and warm, and the sauropod is feeding with the unhurried thoroughness it will bring to every moment of its very long day. And the Troodon are finding whatever they were looking for at the base of the cycad, and the insects are beginning their morning chorus, and the sun is climbing, and everything is proceeding with the peaceful and implacable orderliness of an ecosystem that has found its balance and intends to maintain it. You are part of this balance now, a small, still, temporary part, but a part nonetheless. Rest here for a moment in the warmth of this ancient morning, with the largest creature you have ever been near going about its enormous, gentle business in the trees above you, and the world being exactly what it is, and everything being, in the deepest possible sense, all right. There is resin seeping from the bark of a tree near the forest path, and you've been watching it for some time without quite realizing how long. It is not a dramatic thing to watch. Resin moves very slowly, following the surface texture of the bark in a path determined entirely by gravity and by the microscopic topography of the bark's surface, taking the route of least resistance with the patience of water and with less urgency, because it is more viscous than water and has more surface tension, and the world as it experiences it is a world of great friction and very small forces. But something about watching it is deeply, genuinely calming. The slow accumulation of the substance at the leading edge of its flow, the way it catches the afternoon light in a colour that is between gold and amber and is not quite either, the way it seems to pause and then continue and then pause again as though making decisions about how to proceed. The afternoon has its own quality on this island, a warmth that is not the urgent warmth of noon, but the richer, more settled warmth of a sun that has passed its highest point and is now at an angle that seems to illuminate the world with more intention, more care, catching the surfaces that noon overlooked and giving them a moment of attention before the long descent toward evening begins. The leaves of the forest at this hour are translucent along their edges, where the light comes through them, and the veins of each leaf are visible as darker lines within the general luminosity, like the roads on a map seen from above, or the branches of a river delta seen from high enough that the detail becomes pattern. You are walking slowly along a path that follows the course of a small stream, not quite a stream really, more of a permanent trickle, a thread of water that moves through a channel it has cut over many years through the root-packed soil of the forest floor. The sound of it is barely audible over the ambient sound of the forest, but it is consistently there, and you find yourself unconsciously timing your breathing to it, not to the irregular gurgling of the water over small stones which has no regular rhythm, but to the overall pace of the sound, which is slow and continuous and gentle, and therefore exactly right as a pacer for afternoon breathing in an ancient forest. The amber light is everywhere now. It is on the surface of every leaf and every piece of bark and every stone in the stream bed, and it is in the air between things, which the afternoon sun fills with the particular quality of old, warm gold that makes everything look simultaneously more real and more like a painting. More real because the detail is crisp and fully illuminated, more like a painting because no scene in real life is quite this saturated and warm and still. You've been in this light before, in other forests, on other afternoons, and it has always done this, made the world look like a memory of itself, like the world as you will remember it later, from some further point in time, with all the irrelevant things edited out and only the beautiful essential things remaining. A gallimimus, an ostrich-like dinosaur, two-legged and long-necked and built for speed rather than strength, appears on the path ahead of you. It has emerged from the vegetation to the left and paused in the path with the uncertainty of an animal accustomed to having paths to itself that suddenly has company. It looks at you. You look at it. There is a moment of mutual assessment that is, in its way, courteous, each party taking the time required to determine that the other party is not a threat, is not of interest in any predatory sense, is simply another inhabitant of the same forest going about its own afternoon business. The gallimimus resolves its assessment first. It moves across the path in 3 long, light strides. It is extraordinary watching it move, the way the long legs cover ground with such minimal effort, the body held level and steady above the rapid movement of the legs the way a bird's body is held level in flight, and disappears into the vegetation on the right side of the path with barely a sound. The path is yours again. You sit down at the edge of the stream and remove your shoes. In this world you have shoes, the dream provides for this, and lower your feet into the water. It is cold. Not uncomfortably cold, but cold with the particular clarity of cold that comes from water that has been running through deep soil and rock for a long distance before reaching this place, that carries in its temperature the coolness of the underground, the permanent cool of the earth below the reach of direct sunlight. The cold spreads up from your feet, and you exhale slowly, and the warmth of the afternoon settles more securely around your shoulders as the cold settles around your ankles, and the two temperatures find a balance that is entirely comfortable, entirely right. The stream is doing what streams do, which is to say everything all at once, in miniature. In the section of stream immediately before you, you can see several distinct things happening simultaneously. A small fish, barely longer than your finger, pale and quick, holding position against the slight current with the invisible work of its fins. A water insect moving across the surface with the confident impossibility of surface tension. An eddy forming and releasing and forming again behind a small stone. A particle of clay, bright red in the amber light, drifting with the current and then catching briefly on a submerged root, and then releasing and continuing its patient journey toward the sea. All of these things are happening right now in this small section of stream, and they are all equally real and equally indifferent to being observed, and they are all part of the same system, and the system is very old and very patient and entirely self-sufficient. The resin tree that you were watching earlier is visible from where you are sitting, if you turn slightly to your right. The resin has progressed perhaps a centimetre further down the bark since you left it, which is about the right rate of progress for resin on a warm afternoon, and it has reached a point where the bark's texture changes, a small ridge, barely visible, that the resin will flow around by taking the longer path to either side. You watch it consider this without anthropomorphizing the consideration. The resin has no preferences, it goes where physics takes it, but the going has an inevitability that looks, from a sufficient distance, like purpose. In some period of this world, not the period you're in now, but a different period, several tens of millions of years earlier, resin from trees like this one was trapping small organisms in its slow flow, organisms that were small enough to be overtaken by the resin before they could free themselves, and encasing them in an amber capsule that preserved them with extraordinary fidelity through the long transformations of geological time. The insect that sits briefly on the resin droplet forming at the bark's surface right now, a small, dark insect with wings that fold precisely along its back when it lands, might be one such organism, caught for a moment in the amber light of this ancient afternoon, and then released, flying off into the forest to continue its small and complete life, without any knowledge of how close it came to becoming permanent. The afternoon is deepening. The amber light is shifting towards something redder as the sun descends, and its light has more atmosphere to travel through, and the forest is taking on the particular warm glow of late afternoon that makes everything look as though it has been lit from within, as though the source of the light is inside the leaves and the bark and the wet stones of the stream bed rather than above them. The gallimimus is somewhere in the forest to the right, and you can hear very faintly the sound of its movement through the vegetation, a sound like dry leaves rustled by a light breeze, but with the slight irregular quality of movement that is directed rather than random. Your feet are still in the stream. The cold has long since balanced with the warmth, and your feet are simply in the water now, at a temperature that your body has accepted and adjusted to, and ceased to calculate. The small fish has not moved from its position against the current. The water insect has moved on. The eddy continues its cycle of formation and release behind the small stone. The particle of red clay has been carried some distance downstream and is no longer visible from where you sit. Sit here for a while longer in the amber light, in the warmth that is also cooling, in the particular afternoon stillness of a world that does not hurry. The stream talks to itself quietly. The resin moves at its own pace. The forest breathes around you in the long, slow rhythm of photosynthesis and transpiration, processing the afternoon light into the oxygen that fills your lungs with each slow, even breath. The afternoon holds you. The amber holds you. The ancient, unhurried world holds you in its warmth, and you are still, and you are warm, and the story continues in the way that all good stories continue, gently, without urgency, toward a place of rest. Near the island's highest point, the vegetation changes again. The forest that covers the lower slopes gives way here to a more open landscape, Not bare exactly, but thinner, with the trees growing smaller and more widely spaced as the volcanic rock becomes more prevalent near the surface and the soil less hospitable to the larger species. Between the trees, the ground is carpeted with a low, tough vegetation that has adapted to the combination of exposed rock, occasional volcanic gases seeping from fissures in the ground, and the strong, salt-laden winds that reach this altitude when the weather builds from the west. It is not a comfortable landscape for most things, but it has its own beauty, the beauty of sparse places, the beauty of what remains when the excess has been stripped away. From here, on a clear evening, you can see most of the island below you, the interior valley where the herds move, the dark line of the coastal forest, the beaches curving between the headlands, the glint of the river winding southward, and beyond all of it the sea, extending in every direction to horizons that are clean and unbroken, and carry at this hour the particular deep blue of late afternoon water that has been looking up at the sky for long enough to have learned its colour. The view is so large and so complete that taking it in feels less like a visual experience and more like a physical one. A sense of expansion in the chest, a widening of the frame within which you understand yourself to exist, a brief and welcome experience of scale. The volcanic rock around you is warm from the day's heat, warmer in some places than in others. The fissures particularly radiate a warmth that is more than solar, that comes from deeper than the sun can reach, from the geological processes that built this island and are still, slowly, adding to it and in places removing from it, the whole structure in a state of ongoing negotiation with the forces that make and unmake island-sized things. You can smell the volcanic gases very faintly, a sulphurous edge to the air, not strong enough to be unpleasant, just present enough to remind you that you're standing on something that is alive in its own geological way, something that is itself a kind of organism, metabolizing and growing and changing at a pace calibrated to geological time. The sunset from this vantage point is extraordinary. You have seen sunsets from high places before, and each one has been different from the others in the same way that no two moments of the same phenomenon are ever quite the same. But this one, this evening, this sky, this particular arrangement of cloud and air and sea, has something the others lacked. Perhaps it is the absence of any human structure in the view below you, any tower or road or light that would anchor the scene to the present moment. Everything you can see has always looked like this, or something very close to this, and will look like this for a long time to come. The sunset is not happening to a world that changes. It is happening to a world in its natural state, which changes only on timescales too large to observe from a single evening's vantage point, which means it appears, from here, not to be changing at all. The colours proceed through their sequence. The initial gold intensifies toward orange as the sun reaches the layer of haze above the horizon. The atmospheric particles that scatter the shorter wavelengths and let the longer ones through. The physics of light that determines, without any aesthetic intention, that sunsets should be warm. Then the orange deepens to a red that is not blood red or brick red, but something more complex. A red with pink in it and a slight violet at its edges. A red that is specific to this atmosphere and this moment, and would be impossible to reproduce exactly anywhere else. Then the red softens and spreads as the sun's disk crosses the horizon and disappears below it, and the sky above the former position of the sun is left with a gradient that goes from the pale, washed-out colours near the horizon through deeper blues to the first dark blue of the approaching night. Behind you, to the east, the sky has already darkened to the deep blue that precedes full night, and the first stars are appearing, the brightest ones first, the ones whose light is powerful enough to be visible before the sky is fully dark. You turn between the sunset to the west and the oncoming night to the east, watching both proceed, the sky in each direction doing different things at the same time, the whole dome above you in transition from one state to another, every direction offering a different moment of the same change. The pterosaurs that roost on the rocky upper slopes are settling for the night. You can hear them, a colony of perhaps 50, their calls ranging from sharp and brief to the longer, lower sounds of established communication between individuals who know each other well. They are folding their wings and finding their places on the ledges and overhangs of the volcanic rock, their bodies orientating with their large eyes toward the remaining light in the west in the way that roosting animals orientate toward warmth. Some are still flying, making last circuits of the rocky terrain in the final light, but these are reducing in number as the minutes pass, and by the time the sun has been fully below the horizon for 10 minutes, the flying is done and the colony is settled and the sounds of their settling diminish toward the quiet breathing of sleep. You have found a ledge of volcanic rock that is warm and flat and exactly the right size for a person to sit or recline on, and you have been here for some time, watching the sky proceed through its evening changes. The ledge faces southwest, so you have had the full benefit of the sunset, and now you are facing a sky that is still faintly lit at the horizon, a line of pale gold and peach that is the last evidence of the sun's presence before full dark, while above you the stars are multiplying rapidly in the darkening blue. The island below you is quieting, the sounds of the day creatures are diminishing, replaced by the sounds of the night creatures that you have come to know over the course of this long, slow, beautiful day. The insects of the night canopy, the frogs of the wet margins, the nocturnal pterosaur whose flight is soundless from this distance. The river, which you can no longer see in the dark of the valley but can still faintly hear, or rather, can hear the occasional animal sound from the direction of the river, which is not the same thing but is a kind of hearing by association. The river is still there, still moving, carrying the last of the day's rain toward the sea. The warmth of the volcanic rock is extraordinary here at the end of the day. It has been absorbing sunlight for 12 hours and it is releasing that warmth now at a rate that exactly counteracts the cooling of the air as the night comes in, so that you are warm even as the air temperature drops, warm from below in a way that is different from the warmth of a fire or a building, a geological warmth, a planetary warmth. The warmth of processes so old and so large that they dwarf the small temporary warmth of your own metabolism. You're being warmed by the same energy that built this island. You're being warmed by the planet itself. The stars have completed their takeover of the sky. The horizon line in the west is dark now, the last of the twilight gone, and the sky from horizon to horizon is the full, rich dark of a night sky that has never seen artificial light, populated from edge to edge with the stars that have always been there, but that the light of the modern world has made difficult to see. From this high vantage point, with the clean air above the island and the absence of any competing light source, you're seeing the sky as it was seen by every human eye from the beginning of human eyes until very recently. The sky that generations beyond counting fell asleep under, watching the same stars trace the same slow arc from east to west as the earth turned beneath them. Earth turned. You're lying on the warm rock now. It happened gradually, the recline becoming more pronounced, the body taking advantage of the available horizontal support, which is an excellent support, warm and solid, and wide enough that there is no concern about the edge, no reason to hold any tension in any muscle against the possibility of falling. You're lying on the warm rock of an ancient island, beneath a sky full of stars, at the top of the world, and the night is deep and quiet, and everything below you on the island is settled and still, and proceeding at the pace of things that know how to be still, and you are as still as any of it, and you are warm, and you are exactly at the boundary between here and sleep, which is a beautiful place to be, and there is no reason to move from it in either direction just yet. To understand the forest, you need to understand it from above. The view from the forest floor, which is where most visitors to a forest spend their time, gives you the roots, and the trunks and the lowest branches, gives you the ground-level perspective of something small and terrestrial, which is useful and real but incomplete. The forest from above, from the canopy, from the level where the tree crowns meet and overlap and create the continuous ceiling that defines everything below, is a different forest entirely, a forest of light and air and open sky, and extraordinary distances in every horizontal direction. You have climbed to the canopy of the island's central forest, by means that the dream has made available, a gradual ascent along a ridge where the forest floor and the canopy level come close together, where the trees on the upslope side have their crowns at approximately the same altitude as the floor of the slope above them, so that by following the ridge upward and then moving outward from it, you have arrived at the level of the upper canopy without having climbed vertically in any way that felt like climbing. You're simply here, in the crown of a very large tree, on a broad, stable branch that has accumulated over its decades a comfortable cushion of moss and epiphytic plants, sitting in the air above the world. The view from here is the horizontal view that the forest's aerial inhabitants see. the unbroken green surface of the canopy stretching in every direction, rising and falling slightly as the topography of the land below is reflected in the heights of the trees above it, but essentially continuous, essentially flat. An ocean of green punctuated by the occasional taller tree that extends above its neighbours and carries, on its exposed upper branches, a different community of organisms from those that live at canopy level. Organisms adapted to more direct sun, more wind, less humidity, the more extreme conditions of the exposed uppermost atmosphere of the forest. Pterosaurs fly at this level. They pass over the canopy surface at intervals, moving with the particular economy of flight that comes from knowing the aerodynamics of a particular airspace intimately. The thermals that rise from the forest floor, the updrafts off the exposed ridges, the patterns of air movement that the topography creates, and that a flying animal learns over time, as a river learns its channel, through the accumulated experience of following what works. Two of them pass overhead while you're watching, moving in the same general direction but at slightly different altitudes, their shadows crossing the canopy surface below them in brief ellipses that the canopy organisms respond to with brief freezes before resuming their activity. At canopy level, there are creatures you have not seen from below. Small, quick dinosaurs, no larger than pigeons, bright-eyed and agile, move through the upper branches with a facility that suggests they have spent their entire lives here, in the air and the high light, that the ground is as remote and theoretical to them as the canopy is to the ground dwellers below. They are eating insects primarily, catching them with quick, precise movements that require no apparent effort, a snap, a swallow, a repositioning, another snap. The whole process so fluid and continuous that it looks less like feeding and more like breathing, like the automatic function of a system that barely needs to direct its own attention to the task. The light up here is extraordinary. Below the canopy, light is filtered and diffused and dappled and green. Above the canopy, light is direct and full and white and without reference. At canopy level, you're exactly at the boundary between these two modes of illumination, sometimes in full light when the canopy opens around you, sometimes in the dappled transition zone at the edge of a shadow cast by a taller tree. This transition zone, which the forest moves through with every shift of the sun and every movement of the upper branches in the wind, is where the most complex photosynthetic activity occurs. The leaves at this level working harder than those above or below, harvesting the maximum available light in a constant and restless reorientation toward the sun that gives the upper canopy its slightly shimmering quality in a breeze, every leaf surface turning and turning to catch what the sun offers. The wind up here is present in a way that the forest floor forgets about entirely. Not a strong wind, this is a warm, moderate day, the kind of day that produces gentle, consistent movement rather than gusts, but a steady, directional movement of air that carries information from the wider world, the smell of the sea, perhaps 20 kilometers to the south, the particular dry quality of air that has come over the interior plateau, the occasional temperature differential that marks the passage of a small cloud above. You can feel it on your face, and it is pleasant. The gentle movement of warm air across warm skin, the mild cooling effect of evaporation, the sense of being in a system that extends far beyond what you can see. A large insect lands on the branch beside you. It is magnificent in the way that large insects are magnificent when you encounter them at close enough range to see the engineering, the compound eye, faceted and dark, that registers movement in almost every direction simultaneously. The segmented body, jointed and precisely armoured, the wings folded along the abdomen in a configuration that makes them look smaller than they are, ready to unfold and become something very different at a moment's notice. It is an ancestor of something you might recognise in the modern world, though the lineage has changed considerably in the intervening time, and the changes have mostly been reductions. It will become smaller over time as the world changes and different sizes carry different advantages. For now, it is this, large and intricate and extraordinary in the afternoon light, performing some investigation of the branch surface with its mouth parts that you cannot entirely explain but that seems purposeful and complete. The canopy stretches away in every direction, and the horizon beyond the canopy is visible from this height. The sea to the south, the edge of the island to the west where the forest runs out and the volcanic rock takes over, the interior plateau to the north where the land rises and the vegetation changes. You can see the whole island from here, or most of it, and the island from above has the quality of something you can hold in your mind all at once. A completeness, a boundedness that the ground-level experience never provides. The island is a thing, it exists, it has edges, and within those edges, the whole extraordinary experiment of Cretaceous life is running, simultaneously, right now. The herds and the river and the beaches and the forests and the volcanic heights and the tidal pools, all of it happening at once, all of it part of the same system, all of it held within the same few square kilometers of volcanic rock and accumulated soil and layered ecology. You feel from here the island's wholeness in a way that is almost overwhelming, not with anxiety or with the kind of awe that produces a kind of contraction, a pulling back from the too large thing, but with the gentler, more open kind of wonder that expands the chest and slows the breath and makes the world feel, for a moment, both enormous and entirely comprehensible. It is all here. Everything is here. The small mammal at the lagoon's edge this morning, the Triceratops herd crossing the afternoon grassland, the river carrying its red clay to the sea, the turtles on the beach, working their ancient program in the ancient way, the sauropod among the high trees, the pterosaurs at the volcanic summit. All of it simultaneous, all of it connected, all of it part of the same vast, patient, self-sustaining conversation between organisms and environment that has been going on since life first found a way to persist in the warm shallows of an early sea. The light at canopy level is turning golden as the afternoon advances. The small dinosaurs are still moving through the upper branches, their quick movements having found no reason to slow. The large insect has completed its investigation and departed, dropping off the branch edge and opening its wings in a smooth, immediate deployment that carries it out of sight in seconds. The pterosaurs have not returned. The wind continues at its constant, gentle pace, and the canopy moves with it in the slow, wave-like way of a large surface in moderate wind, each crown pressing slightly in the direction of the wind and then recovering, the movement travelling across the canopy surface in a direction-consistent pattern that makes the whole green ocean appear to breathe. You're breathing with it. Your breath is slow and the canopy is moving and the afternoon is warm and the branch beneath you is soft with moss and the world below you is whole and ancient and unhurried, and you are in it, and you are part of it, and there is nothing more required of you than to be here, breathing warm, watching the light change on the green ocean of the world's roof as the afternoon gradually, gently, in the manner of all good afternoons, begins its patient approach toward evening. The Cretaceous sea is not the sea you know. It is warmer. The global climate of this period is significantly warmer than the modern world, and the polar ice that currently stores so much of the planet's water is absent, meaning the sea level is higher and the ocean temperature is higher, and the chemistry of the water is slightly different, all of which produces a marine ecosystem of extraordinary richness and complexity. Standing at the edge of it, on the dark sand beach below the island's southern cliffs, with the warm water coming in over your feet in slow, shallow waves, you feel the difference as much as you see it. The water temperature is almost surprising, warm the way a bath is warm, holding the heat of the long day even as the evening air cools. The sea here is clear, extraordinarily clear, the kind of clarity that results from a combination of the right temperature, the right nutrient balance, and the absence of runoff from agricultural land or industrial processes, the pristine clarity of a sea that has never received anything from human civilization, because human civilization has not yet begun. Looking down through perhaps 3 meters of water in the shallows where you're standing, you can see the sandy bottom with the same definition you would see across a room. Individual grains, small stones, the shadows they cast in the underwater light, the movement of the water over them creating and releasing patterns in the shadow and the sand. Beyond the shallows, the seafloor drops away and the water darkens through the spectrum of blues, from the pale turquoise of the shallows through the deeper blue of 10 meters to the eventual deep indigo of water, too deep for the surface light to penetrate meaningfully. In that darker water, things are moving, large things, their silhouettes visible when they pass close enough to the surface to be backlit by what light remains, their shapes briefly resolved and then lost again in the mid-water darkness. You're not frightened. The large things in the Cretaceous sea are extraordinary, but they belong to this water the way the sauropods belong to the forest, completely naturally as part of a system that holds them, that has been developing the right conditions for them for longer than you can meaningfully imagine. A mosasaur surfaces briefly perhaps 50 meters offshore. You see it as a low shape at the water's surface, the head emerging first, taking a breath with a sound that carries clearly across the water in the evening stillness, and then the long, sinuous body following in a shallow arc before the tail disappears and it is gone again. The surface of the sea closes over its passage in seconds, with the same indifference it closes over everything. The mosasaur was there, and now it is not there, and the sea does not record the difference. What the sea does record, and has been recording throughout the Cretaceous period, is the slow accumulation of calcareous sediment on its floor, the shells and skeletons of the billions of microscopic organisms whose lives are brief and whose deaths are the foundation of the sea's own productivity. These organisms live and die in the upper layers of the water, consuming nutrients and each other, and converting the energy of the sun into the chemical energy of their bodies, and when they die, their shells and cases drift slowly to the sea floor in a continuous gentle snow that falls without season and without end. Over millions of years, this snow will become the chalk, the white cliffs of coastlines not yet formed, the limestone of mountains not yet built. Everything the sea is producing right now will eventually become the landscape of a future world. Everything beautiful and temporary is also, in a long enough view, permanent. You have waded out to where the water reaches your waist and the sandy bottom is still clearly visible, but the drop-off to deeper water is only a few meters further on. The water is warm and buoyant, and the small waves that reach this sheltered area of the coast are gentle enough that they require no active response. You simply stand in them, and they pass through you and around you without asking anything of you. The sun has set behind the island, and the sky to the east is a deep, rich blue, and the first stars are appearing above the horizon in that direction, and the western sky above the island's ridgeline holds the last of the day's colour, a band of apricot and rose that will persist for another 20 minutes before fading entirely. Smaller creatures are visible in the water around you. Near the surface, schools of fish, small, swift, moving in the close-packed coordination of fish that protect themselves through numbers and synchronization, pass through your field of vision and are gone, their movements so rapid and so complete that by the time you have fully registered their presence, they are already past, already elsewhere, the water they displace settling back in the moment after they leave it. Below them, slower and more individual, there are creatures that move along the bottom with a deliberation that is clearly purposeful. Ammonites, their spiral shells catching the last light, moving through the water with a slow, jet-propelled pulse, each pulse a small, precise thing. The ammonites are everywhere in this sea, in ranges of size from smaller than your fist to larger than a cartwheel, in patterns of surface ornamentation so varied and so complex that the study of them alone has occupied generations of paleontologists in the world you come from, identifying species, tracing lineages, reading in the geometry of their shells the record of millions of years of evolutionary experimentation with the possibilities of the spiral form. Here, they are simply animals, going about their animal lives in the water that has always been their home, moving through it with neither knowledge of their future absence nor awareness of the fact that their shells will become the most identifiable remains of this world, the calling cards of the Cretaceous found in cliff faces and quarries and riverbanks across every continent. The light has faded to the point where the water is no longer fully transparent. The clarity that was so extraordinary an hour ago has given way to the blue dark of evening water, in which the shadows and shapes of things are still visible, but require more inference, more filling in from experience and expectation. The mosasaur surfaces again, this time further out, its outline a darker shape against the dark water, the exhalation audible as a brief, forceful breath. It submerges without drama. The sea surface closes over it without drama. The stars above the sea are multiplying in the diminishing blue. You're floating now. It happened gradually. The water is warm and buoyant enough that floating requires no effort, and the transition from standing to floating was a natural consequence of letting the water do what water does with a body that stops insisting on being upright. You're on your back looking up at the sky, your ears below the surface of the water where the sounds of the above-water world are replaced by the sounds of the below-water world. The muffled, liquid, complex sounds of the Cretaceous sea, which are rich and multi-layered and like nothing you have heard before. A soundscape of biological activity on a scale that makes the most biodiverse modern ocean sound sparse by comparison. The stars are very bright above you. The water is warm beneath you. You are floating in the ancient sea at the end of a long, extraordinary day in a world older than the word old, and your body is loose and warm and entirely supported by the water, and there is nothing to hold and nothing to do and nowhere to be except here, floating in this ancient warmth, beneath this ancient sky, in the last of the light of a day that has been, by any measure you care to apply, more beautiful than anything a single word can contain. Let the water hold you. Let the stars watch over you. Let the sea and the sky and the ancient breathing world of which you are tonight, briefly and entirely apart. Let all of it hold you in its warmth and its quiet and its immeasurable patience, as you float on the edge of sleep, as the ancient world breathes around you, as the stars continue their patient transit, and the sea continues its ancient work, and the mosasaur somewhere in the depth below continues its own long, unhurried life in the warm dark of the Cretaceous ocean, and everything continues, and everything is well. Every journey through the deep past eventually finds its way back to the surface of time, not because the past pushes you away, but because the present is where your body lives, where your breath finds its meaning, where the sleep you are now very close to will take place. The return is gradual. It is the reverse of the descent you made without noticing, a slow, gentle rise through the layers of story and atmosphere and ancient light, each layer thinning slightly as you move upward through it, the way a diver ascends through the layered temperatures of deep water, each layer slightly different from the one below. You are walking back through the island now, following no particular path but moving generally northward through the interior forest, in the direction of the research station that stands somewhere at the island's northern edge. A cluster of simple buildings where the scientists who study this place make their notes and have their meals and sleep their necessary sleep between the extraordinary days this island provides. The station is not important, but the walking toward it is. The walking is the return, the slow reintegration, the gentle movement from the wildness and the depth of the island's interior back toward the edge of things, toward the boundary between this world and the world you come from. The forest at night, seen from the ground and moving through it rather than resting in it, is different from any other experience of the forest. It is intimate in a way that the daytime forest is not, the darkness reducing the visible world to a few meters in every direction, creating a moving sphere of perception that travels with you through the larger dark, revealing the world piece by piece as you move through it, rather than all at once. Each step brings a new section of forest into your sphere of perception, and removes an old section, the process continuous and complete, the forest endlessly replacing itself around you as you walk. The sounds of the night are clear and various, and none of them is threatening. The cicada chorus in the upper canopy, the frogs in the wet margins of a small stream that you cross on stepping stones, the stones invisible in the dark but findable by touch, by the slightly different sound the stream makes where the stones break its surface, the occasional snap of a branch somewhere in the dark, a foraging animal, some nocturnal creature going about its nocturnal business, its identity unknown to you and therefore free to be whatever you need it to be, which is something small and harmless and simply alive in the dark forest. Bioluminescence is present here in this forest, though you have not noticed it until now. Small points and patches of cool blue-green light in the undergrowth, and on the surface of certain fallen logs, where the fungi that produce it are breaking down the wood in their slow, thorough way. In the darkness, these lights are visible from some distance, creating a scattered, low constellation on the forest floor that echoes the stars above without meaning to, without any relationship to them except the visual one. The accidental correspondence of two completely different phenomena producing similar effects on the eye of the observer who happens to be looking at both. You pause beside a particularly bright patch of bioluminescence on a fallen log. A species of fungus perhaps the size of your open hand, radiating that cool, clean light with an evenness that is both beautiful and slightly unearthly, as though the log has been touched by something from a different category of existence. The light is enough to see your hand by if you hold it close, and you do. You hold your hand open above the fungus, and your palm is lit from below in that cool blue-green, and you look at your hand in this light, in this ancient forest, in this world that has never seen a human hand before yours, and you think, or you do not think exactly, because thinking is too active a word for the state you're in, but something happens in you that is equivalent to thought, something about continuity, about the fact that this hand and this light exist in the same moment, that the bioluminescent fungus and the human hand are both part of the same unbroken chain of biological inheritance that began in the warm early seas and has been continuing without interruption ever since. The research station comes into view as you clear the last section of dense forest, visible first as a light, warm and yellow-orange against the blue-black of the night sky, and then as the shapes of the buildings themselves low and simple, the windows lit from within where the evening shift of researchers is reviewing the day's observations, or simply sitting with the particular tiredness of people who have spent a day in the presence of extraordinary things and are now processing that experience in the quiet way that such experiences always require. You know this tiredness. You've been carrying it all day, in a way. The tiredness of attention fully given, of presence fully invested, of a day spent genuinely seeing and genuinely feeling, rather than moving through the world half present. The last section of the path from the forest to the station crosses an open area of short grass where the night sky is fully visible. You stop in the middle of this open area and look up. The stars are at their maximum brightness and number, the night deep enough and the air clear enough that the sky seems not flat but three-dimensional. Not a ceiling but a volume, a space you're looking into rather than at, a depth that recedes without limit, each star at its own distance, some close enough in cosmological terms that the difference matters, and others so far that the light reaching your eyes left its source before this island existed, before the ocean that surrounds it existed, before much of what exists now had taken the forms it now holds. Standing in the open grass under this sky you feel, and this is not metaphor or not only metaphor, you feel the turning of the earth, the slow, reliable rotation that carries you from night toward day and back again, that has been carrying every creature that has ever lived on this planet through the same sequence. That is the most fundamental rhythm of surface life, the rhythm beneath all other rhythms. The stars will move by the time you have stood here long enough, their transit across the sky a function of this turning, the apparent movement of the sky above you, actually the movement of the ground beneath you, the planet rotating at the speed it has always rotated, reliably, without exception, without a moment's interruption in the 4.5 billion years it has been doing so. You enter the research station and find a simple room with a cot and a window that faces east, toward the dark interior of the island and the volcanic heights and the valley beyond. The cot has a thin mattress that is exactly adequate, neither too soft nor too firm, and the blanket over it is the right weight for the night temperature, which has dropped to the comfortable cool of a tropical night after rain. You lie down. The window is open, and through it comes the sounds of the island's night, the steady chorus of insects, the occasional distant call, the breathing of the forest in the darkness. The light you turned on when you entered the room is already more than you need, and you turn it off, and the darkness that replaces it is not the unfriendly darkness of an interior room, but the friendly darkness of an open window, and a night that is full of familiar, comfortable sounds. The cot holds you. The blanket holds you. The darkness is warm and the island breathes outside the window and the stars continue their transit above the roof, and the ancient creatures of this ancient world continue their ancient lives in the forest, and the grassland and the sea, and none of it requires anything of you except to be here, lying still, breathing, held. Everything you have seen today, the lagoon at dawn, the herds crossing the afternoon grassland, the river and its patient crocodilian, the Ankylosaurus family and their evening clearing, the rain and the bioluminescence and the warm volcanic rock and the Milky Way and the sea turtles, and the ancient, enormous sea, all of it is still happening right now, outside the walls of this simple room, as it was happening before you arrived and will continue to happen after you have slept, and after you have woken, and after you have returned to your own world. The world does not need to be witnessed to be real. It is real without you, and your witnessing of it does not make it more real, only brings it briefly into the category of things you have known. And knowing it, having spent this long, slow day in it, you carry something of it back with you, the green light and the ancient warmth, and the sound of enormous animals breathing in the dark, the weight of the volcanic rock under your back, and the warmth of the Cretaceous sea and the bioluminescent fungus cool and blue-green in the night forest. You carry all of it, in the way that sleep carries everything, gently, without effort, into the dark where the day's harvest is processed and preserved and woven into the fabric of what you are. Sleep now, The island breathes, the stars move, everything continues, and you, warm and held and exactly where you need to be, finally, fully let go. The tidal pools along the island's eastern shore are among the most extraordinary places on an island that does not lack for extraordinary places. They are formed in the depressions and channels of the volcanic rock that fringes the eastern coastline, where the basalt has been shaped over thousands of years by the action of the waves into a series of basins, channels, and sheltered pockets that fill with seawater at high tide and retain it as the tide recedes, creating small, isolated worlds that are simultaneously part of the ocean and separate from it, connected at high water, independent between tides, each one a miniature ecosystem complete in itself, with its own community of organisms, its own microclimate, its own particular balance of nutrients and light and temperature. You have come here in the early morning, when the tide has only recently retreated and the pools are still fresh, the water in them still cold from the night, still carrying the particular clarity of recently renewed seawater, still hosting the full complement of organisms that were active through the night hours, and have not yet retreated to the darkness under rocks and in the crevices of the basalt walls. The rock around the pools is wet and glistening in the early light, dark and deeply textured, encrusted with organisms, barnacles and small mollusks and bright-coloured organisms that you do not have names for, that will not have names for a very long time, that cover every available surface in layers that are simultaneously a community and a landscape. The first pool you come to is perhaps the size of a large dining table, and perhaps knee-deep at its centre. The bottom is visible through the clear water with extraordinary clarity, a patchwork of different substrates, each one supporting a different community. Bare rock where the wave action is strongest, thin mats of algae on the more sheltered surfaces, scattered gravel at the lowest point of the basin, and on the shaded north wall a thick incrustation of organisms whose individual identities blur at this distance into a general texture of biological complexity, a coral-like structure of layered growth that has been accumulating in this one shaded corner of this one pool for longer than any individual organism within it has been alive. Something moves in the pool. It takes you a moment to identify it. The water, which appeared perfectly still, reveals on closer inspection to be full of movement, small and complex and occurring in several dimensions simultaneously. A small crustacean crosses the gravel at the pool's bottom, its legs moving in the coordinated, many-limbed way of crustaceans that is simultaneously precise and mechanical, each leg doing its specific assigned task in the sequence, the whole motion carrying the animal from one side of the gravel patch to the other, in a path that is neither straight nor random but responsive, reading the surface as it crosses it, and adjusting the path to the information the surface provides. At the water's surface, a water strider, or something functionally equivalent to a water strider, the specific lineage working out slightly differently, but arriving at the same useful configuration, moves across the surface tension with the uncanny confidence of something that has never had to think about the physics of what it does, because the physics is built into it, because it was shaped by selection to do exactly this and nothing else in quite this way. You kneel at the edge of the pool and look more carefully, and the more carefully you look, the more you see. The tidal pool, like every environment that rewards patient attention, revealing its complexity to anyone willing to give it the time it requires. In the shadow of the north wall, what seemed like uniform incrustation resolves into dozens of distinct organisms, each one with its own form and colour and relationship to its immediate neighbours. Beside the gravel at the pool's centre, what seemed like bare rock is inhabited by animals so perfectly camouflaged to the rock's colour and texture that they are visible only when they move, and they move very rarely, their strategy of survival being stillness rather than speed, the patience of things that have found their perfect environment and are content to remain entirely within it. The light is strengthening as the sun rises above the volcanic ridge to the east. It hits the pool at a low angle that sends horizontal shafts of light across the water's surface, and in these shafts of light the water becomes suddenly full of floating particles, tiny organisms, fragments of organic material, the microscopic architecture of the ocean's productivity drifting on the slow currents that move within even the most sheltered pool. These particles are food for the filter feeders, for the organisms that have evolved to extract nutrition from the water itself, rather than pursuing or waiting for larger food. And the filter feeders are everywhere in this pool, their feeding structures, fans and combs and elaborate delicate meshes of organic material, extended into the water in postures that look like aesthetic choices rather than biological imperatives, because the forms that evolution finds for solving particular problems are so often beautiful in exactly the way that solutions to complex problems can be beautiful, inevitably without effort, as a natural consequence of the constraints. You sit on the rock beside the pool for a long time. The tide is fully out now and will remain out for several hours, and the pools have settled into their between-tide equilibrium. The temperature rising slowly as the sun climbs, and the water absorbs the day's heat, the organisms adjusting their activity levels and distribution in response, some retreating as the temperature rises, others becoming more active, the whole community making its collective, uncoordinated adjustment to the changing conditions of the particular moment. You watch this adjustment with the particular attention that tidal pool watching produces, focused but not tense, engaged but not demanding, the mind in the state that observation of complex, slow-moving systems produces when you give them enough time, a state of alert relaxation, of interest without urgency, of being genuinely absorbed in something that requires nothing of you except your presence and your willingness to look. A small bright fish, no longer than your finger, has appeared in the pool while you were watching the crustacean. It moves through the water with the quick, decisive changes of direction that characterize fish in their natural environment. Not random, but purposeful, each direction change a response to some piece of information available in the water that is not available to you, whether through currents or chemical signals or vibrations or some other sense whose existence you're not aware of and whose information you cannot share. The fish pauses near the north wall, among the encrusted organisms, and is for a moment perfectly still in the way that fish become still when they have found a location that satisfies some internal criterion: safe, warm, close to food, positioned correctly in the water column. Then something startles it. Your shadow, perhaps, or a change in the light, or simply the particular restlessness of being a small fish in a large world, and it darts to the other side of the pool and resumes its purposeful navigation. The rock beneath you is warm now. The morning has progressed to the point where the sun has been on the basalt long enough to transfer significant heat to it, and the rock is giving back that heat to anyone who sits on it, with a generosity that seems excessive but is simply physics, the stored energy of the morning sunlight releasing itself into the cooler air and into the warm body pressing against it from above. You are warm in this particular directed way that contact with warm rock produces. Warm from below, the warmth focused on the surfaces of your body that are in contact with the stone, spreading from those contact points inward and outward. It is one of the most comfortable forms of warmth available in a world without manufactured heat. The second pool, a few meters further along the rocky shore, is larger and deeper than the first, and it holds, at its deepest point, a community of organisms that require the stability of the deeper, cooler water. Sea urchins, slow and methodical, their spines registering the slight currents that pass over them like weather vanes in a light breeze. A sea anemone or its Cretaceous equivalent, its column firmly attached to the shaded basalt, its tentacles extended in a patient circular array that is both beautiful and functional, a trap set for organisms small enough to be caught by it, that will be triggered with a speed that nothing about the anemone's stationary appearance suggests it is capable of. The anemone has been in this position, this pool, this wall, this exact patch of shaded basalt, for longer than any individual organism currently living in the pool has been alive. It will be here long after them. Something about the tidal pools teaches patience in a way that most other landscapes do not. It is not simply that the organisms within them are slow, many of them are not slow, but that the pools themselves are in a state of continuous gradual change that operates on a timescale slightly longer than the impatient mind tends to work with. If you watch for 5 minutes, you see very little changing. If you watch for an hour, you see the temperature shift and the organisms respond. If you watch for a day, you see the tide return and transform the entire system. If you watch for a season, you see entirely different species occupying entirely different positions in the pool's community. The tidal pool rewards the same quality that all of this world rewards, the willingness to let things unfold at their own pace rather than demanding that they move at yours. The morning advances, the tide pool's warm, the fish moves through its water and the crustacean moves across its gravel, and the anemone extends its tentacles into the slow current, and the barnacles on the exposed rock between the pools open and close in the remaining thin film of water that the receding tide has left on their surfaces, taking whatever nutrition is available in the water they have been left with, making the most of their circumstances with the thoroughness of organisms that have no alternative and therefore no tendency to complaint. You sit on the warm rock in the strengthening morning, listening to the sea beyond the rock, the constant rhythm of the waves arriving and retreating and arriving again, and you feel the warmth of the stone through your clothing, and the warmth of the sun on your face and the salt in the air from the breaking waves, and you are in this ancient morning on this ancient shore, beside these ancient pools, as present as it is possible to be, and as still and as completely at rest. The research station has a library. It is not a large library. 2 walls of shelving in a room that is otherwise used as a combined dining room and common space, the shelving holding perhaps 300 volumes and an assortment of journals in worn paper covers, along with the accumulated field notebooks of researchers who have worked on this island for the past several years, stacked in chronological order in a section designated by a hand-lettered cardboard sign that says Notebooks, Past, and that someone has amended in a different handwriting to say Notebooks, Past, Continuing. The library smells of the field notebooks particularly, paper and pencil graphite and the particular smell of notes taken outdoors, which carries somehow the smell of the outdoor conditions in which they were taken, damp or dry, or the specific mineral smell of a riverbank, or the salt of the coast. You are in the library at the hour before dinner reading, or not quite reading. The book is open on the table before you, and your eyes rest on the page, but your attention is divided between the text and the sounds coming through the open window, which faces south toward the forest. The forest sounds at this hour, late afternoon, the light outside warm and slanted, are a layer cake of different species and registers, each one distinct and identifiable to the researchers who have been here long enough to learn the vocabulary of this particular place. There is a call that comes from the middle canopy every few minutes, regular as a clock, that belongs to a species that has not yet been formally described, a small feathered dinosaur whose ecology and behaviour are still being mapped by one of the graduate students, whose field notebook on the subject is 3 notebooks thick and still growing. The field notebooks are extraordinary documents. You have been reading one, not the current one, but an older one, from a researcher who worked on the island several years ago and has since returned to a university position on the mainland where, presumably, the notebooks continue, though the subject matter is different and the wild immediacy of field observation has given way to the more structured and perhaps slightly more melancholy observations of a scientist working indoors. The notebook you're reading is from the 3rd year of the project. The researcher clearly passed the initial excitement of arrival and into the deeper relationship with the subject that sustained observation produces, where the strangeness of the creatures has been absorbed into familiarity, and the familiarity is produced in the notebook's voice, a quality of affection that is not sentimental, but is genuinely warm, the warmth of long acquaintance. An entry reads, simply, the female Hadrosaur from Sector 7 was at the river again this morning, 3rd time this week. She's always alone when she comes to this particular spot, which is not her herd's usual watering point. The water here is shallower and slower than at the main crossing, and there are more smooth stones. I watched her for 40 minutes. She did not drink, or not primarily. She stood in the water and moved the stones with her forefeet, a slow, searching kind of movement. When she left, I waded in and looked. Nothing unusual about the stones she had disturbed that I could see, but she'll probably be back tomorrow. The notebook records that she was back tomorrow, and the day after, and that after 2 more weeks of observation the researcher had formulated a hypothesis about what the Hadrosaur was doing, something to do with a mineral supplement available in the fine silt under those particular stones, a mineral that was not present in sufficient concentration at the herd's regular drinking point, and that the researcher's blood samples taken from a different individual suggested might be important to calcium metabolism during pregnancy. The hypothesis was tentative. The researcher wrote, alongside the conclusion, "This is guesswork dressed in the right clothes. But sometimes that is the best available starting point, and the clothes are well fitted." Outside the window the forest continues its afternoon conversation. A different call has started, lower, slower, with a resonant quality that suggests a larger animal, though you cannot see from here what produces it. It repeats at intervals of perhaps 30 seconds, each repetition slightly different in length and pitch from the one before, as though the call is being shaped by feedback. the caller adjusting its output in response to information only it can hear, working towards some communicative goal that the receiver of the call presumably understands even if you do not. Communication is almost always like this, in any medium. The sender adjusting toward the receiver, the two parties converging through iteration on a meaning that neither party could have achieved alone. The researcher whose notebook you are reading had a particular quality of attention, patient, precise, genuinely curious rather than goal-oriented, willing to observe without explanation for extended periods, and to sit with uncertainty without needing to resolve it prematurely. These qualities are not common, or not as common as they should be, in any discipline that involves sustained observation. They are learnable, perhaps, or at least approachable, through the practice of actually doing sustained observation, of sitting by a tidal pool for an hour or watching a single animal for 40 minutes, or reading a field notebook in the warm late afternoon while the forest makes its sounds outside the window and the light moves slowly across the floor. You close the notebook gently. It is old, and the spine is soft and the pages are slightly swollen with the humidity that all notebooks here absorb over time, and you sit with it closed on the table before you. The room is quiet except for the forest outside and the distant sound of someone in the kitchen beginning the preparations for the evening meal. The smell of cooking is beginning to reach you. Something simple, something that smells of garlic and warm oil, and the particular comfort of food prepared by someone who knows what they are doing and is doing it with the unhurried thoroughness of someone who has cooked this meal many times and is not hurrying. Research stations in remote places develop their own cultures, their own rhythms and traditions and unspoken rules, with a speed that reflects the intensity of the shared experience that produces them. The intensity is not always dramatic. It is as often the intensity of shared boredom or shared discomfort, or the shared experience of seeing something extraordinary and having no one to tell except the people you're already telling. This station has its rhythms. The early morning observation shifts, the midday rest period during the worst of the heat, the late afternoon analysis and notebook writing, the communal dinner that everyone attends because the alternative is eating alone and eating alone in this place, surrounded by the sounds of the forest, and the awareness of everything the forest contains is less comfortable than the routines of community, less comfortable than the shared warm room and the food and the voices of other humans processing the same extraordinary world. You're comfortable now, in the late afternoon warmth of the library, with the field notebook closed under your hand and the forest speaking through the window, and the smell of the evening meal beginning to gather itself in the warm air of the station. Your body has settled into the chair, not just rested in it, which is a surface relationship, but settled into it, the way bodies settle into familiar chairs when they're genuinely comfortable and genuinely at rest. The chair's contours received by the body's contours with the particular intimacy of things that have been in contact long enough to learn each other's geography. The light in the room has taken on the quality of late afternoon light that you've been watching change all day on the exterior surfaces of the forest and the rock and the water, and now here it is inside, falling through the open window at a low angle that cuts across the room and illuminates the dust in the air above the table, in a way that makes the dust visible as something other than dirt, makes it visible as the particles it actually is, as the material world in its most dispersed, most aerial, most impermanent form, drifting through the beam of light in slow, random motion that has a beauty to it, once you have ceased to think of it as something to be swept away. The hadrosaur comes to the river every morning, the researcher comes to the library every afternoon, the sun moves through its arc, the tide returns and retreats, the forest breathes its long continuous breath. The field notebooks accumulate their record of careful attention, and somewhere in that record, in the particular combination of observation and inference and appropriate uncertainty that the best field notes contain, is something that will eventually be understood, or something that will suggest an understanding, or something that will make the next observer's question slightly more precise. This is how knowledge moves, in this field and in every field, slowly, incrementally, through the accumulated patient attention of many people over many years, none of them seeing the whole picture but each one adding their portion to the developing image, the image becoming recognizable only from sufficient distance and sufficient time. Rest in the library for a moment, in the warm late afternoon, with the field notebook closed under your hand and the forest making its sounds and the evening meal beginning in the next room. Everything continues, and you, in the warmth of this quiet room, continue with it. There is a storm before this dawn, and it is extraordinary. Not violent, not the kind of storm that tears things from their moorings and demands fear, but large and thorough and filled with its own kind of grandeur, the grandeur of a weather system that has been building for several days over warm water and has arrived at this island with the full weight of all that accumulated energy, which it is now releasing in a steady, sustained way that will last for several hours more before exhaustion brings it to its natural conclusion. The rain on the station's roof is not the polite rain of an English afternoon. It is tropical rain at full force, warm and vertical, and arriving in a quantity that makes individual drops irrelevant, that transforms rain from a collection of separate events into a single, continuous event, a sustained percussion that fills the air above the station roof with sound. You have woken into the storm, not been woken by it. The transition from sleep to waking has been gentle, unhurried, as gradual as the dimming of a light rather than its sudden extinguishing, and you are now in that state between sleep and full waking where the boundary between inside and outside is permeable, where the sound of the rain on the roof has been part of your dreaming and is now part of your waking without the transition having been fully completed. You are warm. The blanket is sufficient. The window, which you left open, has admitted the rain smell and the sound of the rain into the room, but not the rain itself. The overhang above the window wide enough to keep the interior dry. The lightning, when it comes, is not close. It is somewhere out over the sea to the south. The flash is visible through the open window as a diffuse brightening of the sky rather than a specific bolt, the light reflecting off the cloud base in a way that makes the whole southern sky briefly luminous, and then dark, and then luminous again. The thunder follows the lightning by a count that indicates the storm's centre is perhaps 20 kilometres away. Close enough to hear clearly, far enough that the sound has lost its sharpest quality and arrived as something closer to a deep sustained rumble than a crack. The rumble is continuous rather than separate, each new thunder overlapping with the fading echo of the previous, the whole becoming a bass note that underpins the treble percussion of the rain with a depth and richness that transforms the weather from background noise into something closer to music. The island outside the window is invisible, not dark in the ordinary nighttime way, where darkness is the absence of light, and your eyes, given time, adjust to what little is available, but dark in the storm night way, where the rain and the cloud between them absorb and scatter any available light so thoroughly that even the shapes of the nearest trees are indistinguishable from the general darkness. The island might not exist beyond the rain. It is entirely possible, in this moment, lying in the warm room with the rain on the roof and the dark at the window, that the world beyond the station walls is not there, has temporarily ceased in the way that things cease during storms, and will reconstitute itself when the storm passes and the dawn finds its way through the clearing sky. The creatures of the island are managing the storm as they have always managed storms, each species in the way its biology and experience has equipped it to. The larger animals, which cannot take shelter in the way smaller ones can, are simply in the rain, their mass sufficient to maintain their temperature through the duration of a tropical storm, their systems generating enough metabolic heat to compensate for what the rain takes. The Triceratops herd will be standing in the open grassland in the rain, their broad bodies and thick hides managing the water the way they manage everything, stoically, efficiently, with the practical indifference of animals that have never had the option of going inside. The Hadrosaurs will have moved to the edge of the forest, under the lower canopy that provides partial shelter, their broad snouts periodically raised to test the air for information about when the rain might ease. The smaller creatures have taken shelter in the ways available to them, in the hollows of logs, under the overhanging edges of rocks, deep in the leaf litter where the rain's penetration is reduced to a slow dripping rather than a direct strike. The small mammal you saw at the lagoon's edge this morning is somewhere dry and warm, its tiny warm-blooded body generating heat at a rate that its small, well-insulated form can maintain through an overnight storm without significant difficulty. This is one of the advantages of being small and warm-blooded, the ability to find shelter in spaces that larger animals cannot access, the ability to survive conditions that larger animals survive through bulk, and the smaller ones survive through concealment and metabolic efficiency. There is a long flash of lightning, brighter than the ones before it, that briefly illuminates the entire southern sky and the rain falling through it in a snapshot of such clarity that you can see, for that fraction of a second, The individual streaks of rain against the luminous cloud base, the silhouette of the nearer trees against the light, and, you're not certain, and the moment is too brief to be certain of anything, the outline of something large moving at the forest edge, a dark shape against the briefly lit rain that is large enough and shaped in a way that suggests something that is not a tree but an animal, something heavy and slow-moving at the edge of the forest in the storm. And then the lightning is past, and the dark is absolute, and the thunder arrives and shakes the window in its frame gently, and the rain continues, and whatever you saw or thought you saw is simply part of the night again, part of the storm, part of the island, conducting its business in its own way in its own time. The thunder fades. The rain continues. You are warm, and the bed is warm, and the blanket is the right weight, and the sound of the rain on the roof is settling from the dramatic to the sustained, from the urgent to the patient, the storm having made its initial statement and now settling into the long, steady delivery of what it has brought, which is water, which the island needs and has always needed, and which the island's systems are already processing with the efficiency of systems that have been receiving this particular gift in this particular way for a very long time. The forest floor is already redirecting the rain into the channels and systems that will carry it to the river and the sea. The soil is absorbing what it can and running the excess toward the lowest points. The roots of the large trees are drinking through the saturation of the soil surrounding them, drawing up what the rain provides through the capillary action of their vasculature, adding it to the stored water of their heartwood, the reserve that will sustain them through the dry periods that will follow this wet one. You are aware that you are in a story, and that the story is a dream, and that the dream is carrying you somewhere, and that the somewhere is sleep. This awareness is not alarming. It is, if anything, comforting, the way all recognition of pattern is comforting, the way knowing where you are in a story makes the remaining pages feel like an arrival rather than an uncertainty. You are near the end of the night portion of the story. The storm is the storm before dawn, the last darkness before the first light, the deep breath before the exhale of a new day. Everything in this world has been building toward this particular moment of storm and dark and rain, and beyond this moment, the dawn will come with its particular quality of light and promise, and the island will be washed and renewed, and the creatures will emerge from their various forms of sheltering, and the day will begin again. But the dawn is not yet. The rain is still on the roof, still steady, still warm and thorough and doing its ancient work on the ancient island. And you are still in the warm dark, in the moment before the turn, in the last deep minutes of the night, and there is nothing more required of you than to let the rain be on the roof, and let the dark be at the window, and let the storm move through its cycle, and let the island be what it is, and let your body be what it is, which is warm and horizontal and breathing slowly and already more asleep than awake, already more in the dream than in the room, already on the other side of the boundary that you have been approaching all this long, beautiful night. The storm continues, as storms do. It will pass when it has delivered what it came to deliver. The sky will clear in its own time. The first light of the new day will find its way through the diminishing cloud and illuminate the washed and glistening island with the particular freshness that follows rain, every leaf and rock and surface clean and bright, every colour more saturated, the air carrying the smell of everything the rain released from the soil and the bark and the stones, the whole island more itself than it was before the storm, the way everything is more itself after a good washing, after a thorough and patient renewal. But that is later. That is the dawn. And between here and the dawn, there is only this: the rain, the dark, the warm room, the breathing, and you are in all of it, and you are exactly where you're supposed to be, and the story is exactly where it needs to be, and everything is settling, everything is quieting, everything is moving toward the rest that follows the long and extraordinary day. The storm has passed. You know this before you open your eyes, or before you would open your eyes, if this were the kind of story where opening your eyes was a required step, which it is not. You know it because the sound has changed. The rain on the roof, which was the constant throughout the night, has stopped, and the absence of it is not silence, but something very close to silence. A quality of air that has stopped having things happen to it, and is now simply resting in itself, the way everything rests briefly in the immediate aftermath of something that has ended. The dawn comes in through the window slowly. It begins as a general lightening of the darkness, not yet colour, not yet the specific quality of morning light, but simply an increase in the brightness of the dark becoming not quite dark in a way that your eyes register before your mind quite frames it as light. Then the not quite dark becomes a deep blue-grey, and the shapes of things become visible against that grey. The window frame, the edge of the table, the standing things in the room acquiring their silhouettes back after the long night in which they had none. Outside the window, the island is becoming visible with the same slow progression. The tree nearest the window, a large araucarian with a spreading layered crown that has been a presence throughout the night as a darkness against darkness, appears first as a silhouette against the lightening sky, its layered branches gradually resolving from a single dark mass into their individual shapes, each branch and each of the smaller branches at each branch's end becoming distinct as the light increases, the whole tree emerging from the night with the patience of something that has done this 10,000 times and expects to do it 10,000 times more, which is a reasonable expectation. The first birds, the earliest of the early species, the ones for whom the threshold of sufficient light is lowest, whose visual systems have been tuned by selection to function at light levels that most of their neighbours cannot yet use, are calling. Their calls are simple and high and carry clearly through the washed air that the storm has left behind. A single clear note, repeated, a brief phrase of 3 descending notes, a trill that rises and breaks at its peak into a different kind of sound. These calls do not yet constitute the full dawn chorus, which will not begin for another 20 minutes. They are the prelude, the few early voices that go ahead of the main performance, testing the air, establishing presence, beginning the daily renegotiation of territory and status and connection that the dawn chorus, in this world as in all worlds that have evolved creatures who use sound for these purposes, accomplishes. The sky to the east is lightening faster now, the blue-grey giving way to a pale, almost colourless luminosity at the horizon that is the first visible evidence of the approaching sun. This colour, or this near absence of colour, this pale that is neither blue nor white nor grey but partakes of all three, exists for only a few minutes before the sun's approach begins to add warmth to it, begins to introduce the yellow-orange gold that will eventually become the direct light of morning. But while it lasts, this pale horizon light is beautiful in its own right, beautiful in the specific way of things that are in between other things, that occupy the threshold between conditions, that are defined by their transitional nature rather than by any quality they hold stably. The forest responds to this light. The birds are louder now, and more of them are active. You can hear the flutter of wings from the trees near the window, the rustle of bodies moving through branches, the small sounds of the forest waking to the return of the conditions that permit the activities of the day. The insects that were active throughout the night are retreating, their calling diminishing as the light increases and the conditions that triggered it change. In their place, the day insects are beginning to stir. You will not be able to hear this directly, but you know it is happening. Know that in the undergrowth and in the bark and in the soil, the systems that generate the day's ambient sound are powering up, preparing for the hours ahead. The colours arrive with the sun. The moment when the sun crests the eastern ridge and sends its first direct light across the washed island is a moment of colour, sudden and complete, the world going from the neutrals of pre-dawn light to the full saturation of a post-storm morning in what feels like an instant, though it is not an instant but simply very fast, faster than the mind expects. The trees are bright, the wet rock is dark and gleaming. The pools left by the storm's rain in the depressions of the ground are briefly mirrors, reflecting the sky back to itself in broken, glinting pieces. The grass of the interior valley, which you cannot see from here but can imagine with the clarity of a mind that has spent a full day walking through it, is heavy with water drops that the new light is setting alight, each one a small, brief fire. The island smells of the rain. This is the specific, extraordinary smell of a tropical island after a significant overnight rain. Not just petrichor, though that is part of it, but the full aromatic complexity of a dense ecosystem that has been saturated with water and is now releasing the compounds the saturation has mobilized. The oils of bark and leaf, the minerals of the soil, the breakdown products of the organic matter in the forest floor, the particular smell of wet volcanic rock that carries something of the island's geological history in its chemistry. The air is thick with all of this and warm and moving slightly as the day's first heating begins to generate the small convective currents that will become the day's breeze. You breathe it in, slowly, completely, and it fills you with something that is both simple and impossible to adequately describe. The smell of aliveness, the smell of everything working, the smell of the world in its fullness. The dawn chorus has begun properly now. The full community of the island's vocal organisms is engaged, the birds of multiple species overlapping their calls in patterns that are simultaneously chaotic and organised, each individual following its own program and the result of all of them together producing the layered, rich, complex sound that is one of the oldest sounds on Earth, that has been occurring every morning on every land mass that has been warm enough and productive enough to support communities of vocal organisms for hundreds of millions of years. You are hearing something that predates music by an enormous margin, something that predates the concept of sound as something to be listened to rather than simply responded to. The dawn chorus is the oldest thing that has a sound. You're sitting in the doorway of the research station, on the low step that faces east, and the morning light is on your face and your hands and everywhere the morning touches, and the island is spread before you in its post-storm freshness, and the dawn chorus fills the air around you with its ancient, complex, beautiful sound. And there is coffee. In this version of the story, the research station has coffee. There is coffee in a mug in your hands, warm against your palms, and you're sitting with it in the morning light and listening to the world begin its day, which it does without ceremony and without the need for any audience, which it does in exactly the same way it has always done it, and will always do it, completely, effortlessly, as the natural consequence of being a world that knows how to be a world. This is the new dawn on the island. This is the morning after the storm, after the long night and the long, beautiful day before it. The herds are moving in the interior valley, following their tracks through the wet grass with the unhurried certainty of animals whose route does not change regardless of the conditions, whose daily circuit is as fixed as the sun's arc above it. The river is running high and fast with the storm's contribution, and at the shallow crossing, the Hadrosaurs are negotiating the higher water with slightly more care than usual, the current stronger against their legs, the familiar bottom less visible through the turbidity. The tidal pools are refreshed, their communities sorting themselves back into their equilibrium positions after the disturbance of the heavy swell. The sauropod, somewhere in the high interior, has resumed its methodical feeding in the first light, the rhythm of strip and swallow continuing as it has continued throughout the night, with the metabolism's patient indifference to darkness. Everything continues. Everything begins again. The story has been going on for the entire long night and the long day before it, and it will go on for as long as the island stands and the world allows it to stand, which is a long time, which is a very long time, which is long enough that the word long stops being useful and something else is required. Something closer to always, something closer to the geological sense of continuance that makes all our brief human durations seem, in the most comforting and freeing possible way, small. You're small in this world. Your presence is temporary, and your passage leaves only the lightest mark. And this is not a source of anxiety, but of relief. The relief of not being required to be permanent, not being required to be significant, not being required to be anything other than briefly and entirely and wonderfully here, in this morning, with the coffee warming your hands and the dawn chorus in the air, and the whole extraordinary ancient world stretching out before you, in the fresh, clean light of a morning that does not know it is special but is. There is a grove of trees in the northern part of the island where the resin is extraordinary. Not the ordinary resin production of any tree, which is a defensive mechanism, a response to damage or infection, but something more prolific, more constant, a characteristic of these particular trees in this particular stand that has resulted over the centuries in a landscape where the air itself smells of fresh pine-like compounds, and every trunk is decorated with flows of hardening amber in various stages of transition from liquid to solid, some still glossy and translucent, some already clouded, and beginning the long process of mineralization that will take millions of years to complete. The trees here are ancient, and the accumulation of their production over those centuries has left the grove with a quality unlike any other part of the forest, a richness and complexity of texture and colour that makes the afternoon light seem to come from inside the trees as much as from the sky. You enter the grove from the south, through a narrow path between two of the smallest trees at its edge, and the transition from the regular forest to this amber grove is immediate and complete. The smell changes first, from the general green and earth smell of the forest to something more specific, more resinous, a smell that is simultaneously sharp and warm, that carries both the freshness of something volatile and the depth of something ancient. Then the light changes, filtering through the amber deposits on the trees in a way that gives everything in the grove a warm, golden tint that seems to change the quality of the air itself, as though the air here has been stained by the light that has passed through so many layers of amber. The amber deposits on the nearest trees are the first things you examine closely, and they reward close examination with the same generosity that tidal pools do, revealing more the more carefully you look. The freshest deposits are still liquid enough to flow very slowly, their surface smooth and glossy, the colour a deep warm gold that is almost orange where the depth is greatest. In these fresh deposits, the surface is sometimes broken by the fine structure of the bark, showing through from below, the amber thin enough in these places that the pattern of the bark is visible beneath it like a relief print. The older deposits are thicker, their surface matte, their colour deeper and less transparent, and in some of them you can see, if you look at exactly the right angle in exactly the right light, the shapes of small inclusions, bubbles, particles of bark, and occasionally something else, something with legs or wings, or the articulated geometry of an insect body, preserved in the amber at the moment of its entrapment, with a fidelity that nothing else in the natural world can match. The inclusions in the older amber are extraordinary. You move along the grove's central path, leaning close to each tree in turn, examining the deposits that are at eye level, and in several of them you find what you are looking for. Small organisms caught in the resin at some point in the past, their forms preserved in varying degrees of completeness and clarity. Some so clear that every leg and every wing vein is visible, others more obscured by the amber's opacity, their shape suggested rather than fully revealed. A small spider, its legs folded in a posture that somehow conveys something of the velocity of its entrapment. A fly, wings half extended, frozen in the first fraction of a second of an escape attempt that did not succeed. Something smaller, something that requires the best light you can find and the closest examination you can manage. Something that might be a mite or a tiny beetle or something that has no modern equivalent. The thought that has been present in embryo since you entered the grove arrives now with its full weight. These organisms are preserved, not as fossils, not as impressions, not as the chemistry of bone replaced over millions of years by mineral, but as organisms, their cells still present, their forms intact, their biological material sealed by the amber from the processes of decay that normally return organisms to the general pool of materials from which other organisms are made. The amber has interrupted the cycle. It has taken something out of the cycle and held it apart, preserved it in the state it was in at the moment of entrapment, and will preserve it, if undisturbed, if the chemistry of the amber remains stable, if no future geological process breaks the deposit and exposes its contents to the air, for an extraordinary length of time, longer than you can comfortably think about, longer than the word long can contain. You know this is where the island's particular magic has its origins, not in the creatures themselves, extraordinary as they are, but in this grove and places like it, in the preservation that amber makes possible, in the information that amber preserves about organisms that would otherwise be completely lost to time. The amber does not preserve everything. The genetic material that the researchers study is fragmentary, degraded, present only in traces that require the most sophisticated techniques available to detect and decode. But it preserves enough. It preserves the possibility, and from the possibility through the application of the technology, and the skill and the patience of the researchers, the organisms that you have spent the day watching, the Triceratops and the Ankylosaurus and the Hadrosaurs and the sauropod, have been called back from the silence of geological time into the speaking world of biological presence. The grove is quiet in the late afternoon. No large animals come here. The density of the resin deposits makes the footing uncertain, and the smell, which is pleasant to you, seems to be aversive to many of the island's inhabitants. The smaller creatures are present, the quick, bright-eyed dinosaurs of the upper canopy, the insects of the resinous trees, but the groves is largely the domain of these trees and their production, a space that exists at a slight remove from the busy ecology of the rest of the forest, maintained in its peculiarity by the very product that makes it peculiar. You sit down at the base of one of the larger trees, with your back against its trunk and the amber deposits above you on every side within reach. The trunk's bark is rough and warm behind you, and the amber deposits on the bark near your head catch the afternoon light in colours that shift as you move: gold, amber, deep orange, occasional moments of a red so dark it is almost brown. The colour of the afternoon light itself, multiplied and concentrated and returned to you from every surface you face. You feel enclosed in warmth, in the amber light of a grove that is producing beauty and preservation simultaneously, that is making a record of this world and enclosing that record in its own hardening product, against the day when someone will find it and open it and be astonished by what it contains. The science of amber preservation is not simple, and the technology required to extract anything meaningful from the biological material within it is not simple, and the gap between what the amber preserves and what can be recovered from what it preserves is enormous, measured in millions of years, in the chemistry of degradation, in the sheer improbability of any sequence of events that results in ancient genetic material being readable by a modern laboratory. And yet, the island exists, the creatures exist, you have spent a day among them, the gap has been crossed by some combination of science and will and resource that you do not need to fully understand in order to appreciate its outcome, which is this grove, this warm afternoon, this amber light. These living animals in their ancient landscape, restored from the silence of deep time to the speaking present, with all their complexity and their beauty, and their complete indifference to the miracle of their own existence. The afternoon amber light deepens. The trees above you are not transparent, but the amber deposits on them catch and hold the light in a way that feels almost like transparency, as though the light is not being reflected from the surface of the deposits, but is coming through them from some source inside the trees. You have been sitting here long enough that the light has moved perceptibly, that the shadows have lengthened, and the quality of the gold has shifted towards something slightly warmer, slightly more orange, the sun lower now and its light older, having passed through more of the atmosphere than it passed through at noon. The grove is going slowly golden, and then slowly amber, matching its own production, becoming, in the last light of the afternoon, as preserved and beautiful and warm-coloured as everything it has spent its long life preserving. You are beginning to feel the particular tiredness of a long day spent entirely outdoors, not the irritable tiredness of insufficient sleep, but the deep, satisfied tiredness of a body that has been genuinely used, that has walked and sat and stood and breathed the outdoor air from dawn to dusk and has processed an enormous quantity of experience and is now ready, genuinely and completely ready, to rest. The tiredness is in your legs and your back and your eyes, which are warm and heavy in a way that is not uncomfortable, but that has a kind of inevitability to it. The inevitability of all natural things following their natural courses, the tiredness following the activity, the rest following the tiredness, as it always has and always will. Rest here for a little while longer in the amber grove, in the warm light of the late afternoon, with the ancient trees above you producing their ancient product, and the amber deposits on every surface catching the light and returning it in the warmest possible colours. Your breathing is slow, your body is heavy against the tree's warm trunk. The grove is quiet, the world is warm, and somewhere in the amber of these trees, caught in the slow flow of a substance that has been accumulating for centuries, is the record of everything that has lived here. Every small thing that flew past or landed or crawled at the wrong moment in the wrong direction, preserved with perfect fidelity, held against time as you are held against sleep, as everything is held in the long moment before the transition comes. The last light of the day on the island is different from the first. The first light is tentative, questioning. It arrives as a question posed to the darkness, to which the darkness gradually, over the course of an hour, concedes the answer. The last light is conclusive. It does not fade so much as withdraw, making its position clear before departing, burning brightest in the last minutes before the sun crosses the horizon, so that the landscape, the island, the ocean, and the sky above it all are briefly more vivid than at any other moment of the day, every colour at its maximum saturation, every shadow at its longest, every surface receiving the light at the angle that reveals it most completely. You are at the lagoon where the day began, where you first arrived in the soft pre-dawn mist, sitting on the low bank with your feet in the water and the last light of the day on your face and hands. The lagoon is a mirror again, as it was this morning, reflecting the sky with the faithfulness of a surface that has been practicing reflection for long enough to have become very good at it, but the sky it reflects now is not the tentative, mauve-grey of early morning. It is the full, saturated, unrepeatable spectrum of the last evening light, gold and amber and rose, and, at the zenith directly above you, a blue so deep and pure that it seems to have drawn all the colour available to a Cretaceous evening into itself and concentrated it into a single perfect expression. The water around your feet is warm from the day's sun, and the air above it is beginning to cool toward the temperature it will hold through the night, and in the space between the warm water and the cooling air, a faint mist is forming. The same mist, or the same kind of mist, that you walked through this morning, the cycle completing itself with the faithful regularity of all natural cycles, the lagoon producing its morning mist and its evening mist, and the day between them being the story that connects them. You have been in the middle of that story all day, and you're now at its other end, at the corresponding edge of the day to the one at which you began, and the symmetry of it has a beauty that is not forced or sentimental, but simply the beauty of things that are genuinely symmetrical, genuinely balanced, genuinely completing what they began. The sounds of the evening are gathering. The birds are making their last statements before the dark. Some species are loud at this hour, louder than at any other hour, as though the approaching night adds urgency to whatever it is they need to say. Others are quieting, withdrawing from the air into the vegetation with the same purposeful efficiency with which they emerged from it this morning. The insects of the transition hour have arrived, replacing the day insects in a succession that is not quite visible, but that announces itself through the change in the ambient sound, the day's higher frequency drone giving way to something slightly slower, slightly deeper, still complex but differently complex, the complexity of a different community, using the same resources in the same place. Something moves in the lagoon, a ripple spreading outward from a point near the far bank, then another, and then the source of the ripples becomes visible. A small crocodilian, not the one from the river, but one that belongs to this lagoon specifically, that has been here throughout the day in a motionless patience that you did not notice, because it was indistinguishable from the mottled surface of the far bank until it moved. It moves now with the slow, authoritative glide of something completely at home in the medium it is moving through, crossing the lagoon in a long, gradual arc toward the near bank and your feet, without any acknowledgement of your presence that you can detect, without adjusting its course by a degree or changing its speed by a fraction. It is not approaching you, it is approaching the bank, which is where it always comes in the evening, and the fact that you are on the bank is a coincidence it has decided not to find relevant. It reaches the shallows near your feet and pauses there, half in and half out of the water, its body on the gently sloping bank and its tail still in the lagoon, and it closes its eyes. Or does something that produces the same effect as closing its eyes, the nictitating membrane sliding across each eye in a slow lateral movement, and it is still, entirely still. Not the stillness of alertness, not the stillness of an animal attending to something beyond your perceptions, but the stillness of something that has arrived at the place it intended to be and is now doing nothing, needing nothing, requiring nothing from the world for the next several hours, except to be left alone in its chosen spot on its chosen bank, in its chosen lagoon, in the last warm light of a day that, as far as it is concerned, was a perfectly adequate day. Productive, sufficient, complete. You understand this. The completeness of the day, the sufficiency of it. These are things you have been feeling since the afternoon, since the amber grove, since the realization that you have been everywhere on the island, and seen everything that wanted to be seen and followed everything that wanted to be followed, and the day has given you everything it had to give and you have received it, and now you are at the end of it, at the lagoon, in the last light, with the crocodilian beside you, and the sky reflected in the water, and the mist beginning to form at the water's surface in the first cooling of the evening air. Everything that has happened today happened in a world that existed before human consciousness existed, before the concept of significance existed, before anything that walks or flies or swims in this world had developed the capacity to reflect on its own existence, or to care about the passage of time as anything other than the delivery mechanism of the next necessity: food, water, shelter, warmth, the next moment. And yet the day has been full of meaning, for you, who carry the capacity for meaning the way you carry everything, temporarily, imperfectly, with the awareness that what you carry will eventually be set down. The meaning is not imposed on this world. It is found in it, the way the amber finds the organisms that were already in the resin when it hardened, preserving what was already there rather than adding anything that was not. The last light is going. The gold at the horizon is deepening toward orange, and the orange has a red at its base that will intensify for a few more minutes before the sun crosses the line and the colour begins its rapid shift toward the cooler end of the spectrum. The lagoon surface is already beginning to lose the mirror quality of full light. As the light diminishes, the reflection becomes slightly imprecise, slightly impressionistic, the colours more approximate, the details less specific. In a few more minutes it will be beautiful in a different way. The dark water reflecting the first stars, the surface moving just enough in the light evening breeze to make each star into a small, dancing point of light rather than a fixed one. The crocodilian beside you has not moved. Its eyes are still closed or semi-closed. Its breathing is so slow and shallow that at this distance you could not confirm it is breathing except that you know it is, the way you know all the things about this world that you have not witnessed directly but simply understand are happening. The sauropod in the high forest, the Triceratops herd settling for the night in the interior valley, the sea turtles returning to the ancient depths of the warm sea, the tidal pools adjusting to the night chemistry that will shift again at dawn, the amber grove making its slow resinous accumulation in the dark, the river moving southward in the dark, carrying everything southward, the whole island breathing its collective breath in the cooling air of the evening. All that remains now is this: the lagoon and the last light and the mist beginning to form at the water's surface, and the crocodilian still on the bank beside you, and the first star appearing at the zenith, directly above you in the last clear blue of the sky. All that remains is this particular arrangement of light and water and ancient living things in the last moment of the day. It will not last long. Days never do, even the longest ones. The light will go, and the dark will come, and the stars will multiply, and the night will proceed at its own pace through its own sequence of events. The animals that belong to the dark conducting their dark activities, the forest breathing its night breath, the lagoon settling into its nocturnal mirror of whatever sky offers itself to be reflected. And you will be here for some of it, and then you will not be here, and then you will be somewhere else. You will be in the room where your body actually is, in the bed where your body actually lies, in the dark that is not the Cretaceous dark but the familiar dark of your own life, breathing the familiar air of your own world, held by your own blanket and your own pillow, and the familiar comfortable weight of your own ordinary existence. And somewhere between this lagoon and that bed, in the space between the last light of the Cretaceous and the first awareness of your own morning, there is sleep. Deep and full and restorative sleep, the sleep of someone who has spent a long day in an extraordinary world, the sleep that comes after everything has been seen, and everything has been experienced, and everything has been received with full attention and full presence and full gratitude. The lagoon will hold the reflection of the stars tonight, and you will sleep, and both things will be true simultaneously, and both things will be exactly right. The evening here is long. This is one of the things you have learned about this island over the course of the day, that the transitions between its states take more time than you expect, that the island does not hurry from one thing to the next, but lingers in each transitional phase, with the patience of something that understands that the transition is not an inconvenience to be minimized, but a condition with its own character, and its own beauty, and its own ecology, its own specific community of organisms and activities and light that exist only in the threshold between what came before and what will come after. The evening is the threshold between day and night. You have spent the day moving through the island's various landscapes, and now you are moving through the evening the same way, slowly, attentively, without agenda, following the light as it changes and the sound as it changes and the temperature as it changes, noting each change and allowing it to register fully before the next one comes. The evening is not rushing you. The island is not rushing you. The only urgency available in this world is the urgency of wanting to see more than there is time to see, to be in more places than you can be in, to experience more of this extraordinary moment of life on Earth than any single consciousness can contain. And even that urgency is gentle, is not really urgency but something closer to fullness, the pleasant pressure of an abundance of things worth attending to. The path you're walking runs along the edge of the interior forest, where the tree line meets the long grass of the valley floor, and it is a path that exists not because anyone made it, but because animals have walked this particular route for long enough that the grass has learned to part for them, and the ground has learned to receive their weight at this specific location and no other. These trails exist everywhere in wild places, the paths of repeated passage encoded in the landscape by the accumulated decisions of many organisms making the same calculation independently over time, arriving at the same conclusion, that this line between these features offers the most efficient connection between the things on either side of it, and therefore this line, and not some other line, will be the path. The grass beside the path is moving in the evening breeze, which has come in from the sea as the land cools faster than the water, and the temperature differential drives air from the sea toward the land in the gentle, regular movement of the coastal evening wind. The grass moves in waves, not the dramatic, wind-driven waves of a day with significant wind, but gentle, rolling waves of movement that pass through the grass in the direction of the wind in a way that makes the whole field appear to breathe, to inhale and exhale in slow, continuous sequences that are not quite regular, but not quite random, that have the quality of biological rhythm rather than physical oscillation. A group of small feathered dinosaurs is feeding in the grass ahead of you on the path, perhaps a dozen individuals, each about the size of a large turkey, moving through the grass with the quick, jerky precision of birds, their heads moving in the constant snap and examine sequence of creatures that see the world through eyes, placed to give them maximum coverage rather than binocular depth, that compensate for the reduced depth perception with a rapidity and completeness of visual scanning that makes their heads look like small machines, processing, never quite still. They are eating seeds primarily, small seeds from the grass-like plants at the path's edge, consumed with a speed that makes their gathering look effortless, though the speed is the product of a very efficient system optimized for exactly this task over a very long evolutionary time. They do not flee as you approach, or rather, they move. The group drifts in the direction away from your approach without alarm, maintaining approximately the same distance from you as you close toward them, the whole group adjusting with a fluid, collective intelligence that requires no apparent communication, each individual's response to your movement being aggregated into the group's movement with a smoothness that looks coordinated but is simply the result of many similar individuals responding to the same stimulus in similar ways. They are not afraid of you. You are not a threat they recognize, and the absence of recognition is not, in their experience, automatically a source of alarm. It is simply new information that needs monitoring while other, more immediately rewarding activities continue. The evening light has reached the hour of maximum warmth. The sky in the west has gone through gold and is approaching the deeper, richer colours that precede the actual sunset, a horizon that is fading from orange to rose, with the deep blue of the advancing night visible above it in the upper sky, the two zones of colour separated by a band of green that is one of the rarest and most beautiful colours the sky produces, visible only in the few minutes before full dusk when the conditions of light and atmospheric scatter happen to align in exactly the right way. You look up at it without trying to understand it, simply receiving it, letting it register in whatever part of you receives beauty, without the need to process it into language or explanation. The island below the sky is dark with shadow now, the direct light having left it, but the reflected light from the sky above still illuminating everything from above with a diffuse, blue-tinged brightness that makes the landscape look more itself than it does in direct sun. All contrast removed, all harshness gone, everything existing in the same level illumination, everything equal in the last light. The Triceratops herd, visible at the far edge of the valley in the cooling blue light, is a row of dark silhouettes against the slightly lighter colour of the grass, shapes that your eye identifies immediately and completely from their profiles alone, the distinctive three-horn and frill configuration readable as unambiguously as a word in a language you know deeply. You sit down in the grass at the path's edge, and the small feathered dinosaurs, which had been maintaining their careful distance, take note of this change and revise their assessment. A stationary figure is less alarming than a moving one, or more precisely, a stationary figure of your size in this location does not match the pattern for a threat, which typically involves directional movement and approach, so the group drifts slightly back toward you, close enough now that you can hear individual footsteps in the grass, the small sounds of each bird placing its feet with the automatic, unconscious precision of movement that belongs entirely to the body and requires no attention from the mind. The evening is settling in around you. The green band in the western sky has faded, replaced by a deepening rose that will become purple, that will become the first dark of the night. The temperature has dropped by several degrees since the sun went behind the ridge, and the evening breeze carries the slightly more pronounced coolness of air coming off the sea at a time when the sea's temperature is beginning to exceed the land's. The change is welcome. The day's warmth having been exactly right. This cooling is exactly right. Each temperature precisely appropriate to its moment. The island managing its daily thermal sequence with the precision of a system that has been fine-tuning itself for longer than precision can contain. The small feathered dinosaurs are still nearby. Several of them have settled into the grass in a loose cluster, not sleeping. Their eyes are still open, their heads still making their occasional quick scans. But resting, their bodies settled into the grass with the comfortable practicality of animals that have no ideology about where to rest, but simply rest where the conditions warrant it, which here, at this moment, is in the grass at the edge of the path in the cooling evening air. One of them is within reaching distance if you were to reach, which you do not. Its feathers, in the last of the evening light, are a deep, warm brown with hints of iridescence at the edges. Not the showy iridescence of modern peacocks or birds of paradise, but the subtle iridescence of functional feathers doing their structural job and producing, as a consequence of the structural requirements, rather than any decorative intent, this beautiful effect in the right light. The night is coming. The first stars are appearing in the east, and the bats, or the bat-like organisms, the nocturnal flying mammals that fill this ecological niche in this world, are beginning their evening hunt above the grass of the valley, their flight paths complex and darting in ways that trace the locations of the insects they are catching. Each direction changes successful strike, each return to the original flight line the beginning of a new search. They are extraordinary to watch, faster and more agile than any bird, their flight paths less regular but more precise, the whole performance of their hunting, a demonstration of what a flying body can do when it has been optimized for very fast, very accurate three-dimensional navigation in the dark. You are warm enough and comfortable enough, and the evening is long and gentle and the grass holds you, and the sky is full of deepening colour, and the small feathered dinosaurs are resting nearby, with the same comfortable indifference to the approaching night that all well-adapted organisms feel, when the approaching thing is simply the next phase of a cycle they know intimately and have always survived. The night is not threatening. The night is simply what comes after the day, as it has always come, as it will always come, as it came before there was any creature complex enough to anticipate it, or dread it, or welcome it. It comes, and you receive it, and the island breathes around you in its long, reliable rhythm, and you breathe with it, and the evening continues its patient work of becoming the night, and the night will continue its patient work of becoming the dawn, and the dawn will continue its patient work of becoming the day, and the day will hold everything you have seen today and everything you have not seen, and everything the island contains and everything the island is, and all of it will continue as it has always continued, as beautiful and as complete and as entirely itself as it is right now, in this last moment of the evening, with the stars arriving and the grass moving and the small feathered dinosaurs breathing quietly beside you in the cooling dark. There is a quality of silence that exists only in very old places, a silence that is not the absence of sound, but rather something more like the presence of everything that has been said and unsaid, in a place for long enough that the accumulated weight of it has settled into the air and the earth and the surfaces of things, giving the silence a texture, a density, a sense of history that empty air in a newly built space never has. The island has this kind of silence between its sounds. Between the calls of the animals and the sound of the wind in the upper canopy, and the movement of the river and the arrival of waves at the coast, there are intervals, brief, varying in duration, never quite the same twice, in which nothing is making a sound that you can hear, and in those intervals the silence of the island is alive in exactly this way, dense and old and full of what has come before. You notice it for the first time at midday, when the heat is at its peak and the sun is directly above, and the animals that are active in the morning and evening have retreated to their rest, and the insects of the hotter hours have not yet fully replaced them. The island, for perhaps 30 seconds, is silent, and the silence is the sound of 65 million years of mornings and evenings and middays, in which this same silence has occurred, in which the heat has reached its daily peak and the world has briefly paused in its making of sound, and the silence has been here as it is here now, waiting in the hot midday air between one sound and the next. Language, human language, with its grammar and its accumulated vocabulary and its capacity for abstraction and reference, and the transmission of complex internal states across the space between one consciousness and another, is a recent development in the history of life on Earth. Recent in the geological sense, a few 100,000 years, perhaps 1,000,000, depending on how broadly you define language and how carefully you sift the archaeological evidence for its presence in the various forms of ancient humans who left that evidence. Against the timeline of the island, against the timeline of the Cretaceous, let alone the full sweep of complex life on Earth, 1,000,000 years is a moment. The island has been conducting its business for 65 million times longer than language has existed. And yet the island communicates. This is one of the things you understand more clearly as the day proceeds and you spend more time in it, that the silence between sounds is not simply silence, but something closer to communication in the broadest possible sense, the transmission of information from one part of the ecosystem to another, through changes in sound and absence of sound, through the chemistry of the air and the water, through the vibrations of the ground. The hadrosaurs communicate through their crests, using the resonant chambers in their skulls to produce calls that carry information about individual identity and reproductive state and emotional condition, information that other hadrosaurs interpret with the same facility that you interpret speech. The Triceratops communicate through posture and horn angle, and the particular configuration of the frill, a visual vocabulary that functions as fluently in the herd context as spoken words function in the human social context. But there is also communication that is not intentional, not directed, not in any sense the kind of communication that either sender or receiver would recognize as such. The movement of the Triceratops herd through the long grass communicates to every grass-eating insect within a radius of several hundred meters that this section of grass is currently occupied by large animals and will be stripped bare, which is information that affects the movement and feeding choices of every grass-eating insect in the affected area. The passage of the herd communicates to the predators that follow them, the small carnivores that feed on the insects and small animals disturbed by the herd's movement, that here, now, there is a feeding opportunity. The ripple effects of the herd's passage through the grass travel outward through the ecosystem in waves of consequence that diminish in direct proportion to the distance from the initial event but never quite reach zero, as all waves diminish but never quite arrive at nothing. The river communicates to everything along its banks. Its level communicates the recent rainfall. Its turbidity communicates the recent erosion upstream. Its temperature communicates the season. Its smell communicates the chemistry of the upstream watershed, the particular combination of minerals dissolved from the geology it has passed through, the organic compounds released by the organisms living in and along it, the trace chemicals that are signatures of specific events, a landslide upstream, a large animal dead at a tributary, a bloom of particular algae in a section of slow water. Everything that can process chemical information, which is most things in this world, because chemoreception is among the oldest and most universal of sensory systems, reads the river as a constantly updated text about the upstream world. The air communicates. This is perhaps the most pervasive and least visible form of communication in the ecosystem, the one that is hardest to trace from sender to receiver, precisely because it happens in a medium that is invisible and that moves in patterns too complex to follow directly. But the air carries everything that evaporates into it, from the bark of the trees and the surface of the leaves and the bodies of the animals and the surface of the water, and everything that evaporates is a molecule with a specific shape, and every organism that has a chemoreceptor calibrated to that shape receives the molecule as information. The forest is constantly sending and receiving in this way, every organism simultaneously transmitting its chemical signature and receiving the chemical signatures of everything around it, the whole producing an information environment of extraordinary density and complexity that is, in a meaningful sense, the forest thinking. You are part of this communication even without intending to be. Your presence in the forest changes the local chemistry, your skin and breath and clothing all producing compounds that enter the air and are received by the chemoreceptors of the organisms around you, most of which have no framework for interpreting what you are because nothing like you has ever been in this forest before. You are, to the forest's information systems, a novel input. You are processed, and then, in most cases, filed under unknown, harmless, irrelevant. Not because the organisms that receive your chemical signature have decided you are harmless, but because you produce none of the specific combinations of compounds that their systems associate with threat, and in the absence of threat signals, the default response is the response you have been observing all day: accommodation, continuation, the ancient and reliable preference for going on with things rather than stopping them. The silence between sounds on this island is the silence of a system that is communicating in every direction simultaneously in media, that your ears were not built to hear, and your nose was not built to process with sufficient acuity, and your skin was not built to read with sufficient sensitivity. It is a silence only from your perspective, from the perspective of the forest itself, from the aggregate perspective of every organism in it processing every signal available to it. The silence is not silence at all. It is the most communicatively dense environment you have ever been in. It is a place where everything is saying everything to everything all the time, in a language that predates language by hundreds of millions of years. Sit with this for a moment. Sit in the silence that is not silence, and breathe the air that is a message, and let the island communicate with you in whatever way it can communicate with a system, your body, your senses, your awareness, that is capable of receiving much less than it is being sent. Something comes through anyway. It always does, in wild places, in old places, in places where the communication is dense and old and running at full capacity. Something comes through that is not quite information in the ordinary sense, not quite data that your mind can process into conclusions, but something closer to a feeling, the feeling of being in a vast, complex, self-sustaining system that is doing its work all around you, and that has been doing its work since before you arrived, and will continue doing its work long after you have gone, and that accommodates you in its ancient and impartial way, as it accommodates everything that is not a threat and is not a resource, and is simply there, briefly, receiving whatever it can receive of the oldest conversation in the world. Let the feeling settle into you. Let the silence that is not silence settle into you. Let the island's ancient, continuous, incomprehensible communication wash over you the way the warm air washes over you, touching every surface, entering every opening, received by everything that can receive it and released by everything that needs to release it. You're in the middle of the oldest conversation in the world. You're not able to understand most of it. That is all right. Understanding is not the only way of being present to something. Sometimes, often, being present without understanding is the more complete experience, the experience that leaves more room for the thing to be what it is, rather than what you can make of it. The midday silence has passed. The next sound has come, a call from somewhere in the middle canopy, brief and descending, the mark of a species you have been hearing all day without being able to identify, and the island has resumed its audible conversation, layered and complex and ongoing. But you know now what is underneath the audible conversation. You know the silence that underlies all the sound, the silence that is not absence but fullness, the silence of a world that has been talking since before there was anything to listen. And that knowledge, which is not quite knowledge, which is more like an attunement, a slight shift in the way you receive what is being transmitted, goes with you for the rest of the day, and into the evening, and into the night, and into the sleep that is already waiting for you on the other side of this quiet, full, ancient afternoon. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to see more videos like this, please consider leaving a like and subscribing to the channel, as it really helps us continue making more content. Anyways, see you in the next one. The island breathes. You're inside its breathing now, held in the warm dark of the simple room, the window open to the night, the sounds of the Cretaceous coming to you in waves as gentle and as steady as the waves that reach the black sand beach to the south. The forest breathes, the valley breathes, the warm sea breathes, and you breathe with all of it, your breath matching the breath of the world around you, slower and slower, deeper and deeper, each exhalation releasing a little more of the day, each inhalation bringing a little more of the night's quiet into your body. You do not need to hold anything. The island holds everything. The earth holds the island. The night holds the earth. And sleep, deep, warm, entirely safe sleep, holds you, and it is holding you already, the edges of things already softening, the sounds of the Cretaceous already taking on the quality of sounds heard from a great distance, or from the far side of a wall, present but not insistent, there but not requiring anything from you, simply continuing as everything here continues, naturally, inevitably, at exactly the pace that is right. The cot is warm. The blanket is exactly the right weight. The pillow or whatever surface holds your head is exactly the right give under the weight of your skull. Your body is loose. Your shoulders are low. Your jaw is unclenched. Your hands, open and soft on the blanket, are still. Your breathing is barely perceptible, slow as the tide, deep as the valley, consistent as the turning of the earth beneath you. Somewhere in the forest, an animal is moving through the ferns with the quiet sureness of something that knows exactly where it is going. The river, too far away to hear directly, is moving southward toward the sea, carrying its quiet cargo of clay and minerals and the small debris of a living world. The stars above the island are completing their arc. The sea turtles on the beach are still, their work done, their bodies returning to the slow rhythm of rest. The Ankylosaurus family breathes its collective, even breath. The sauropod, somewhere in the high forest, is still and enormous and complete. The island breathes, you breathe, everything is still, everything continues, and you are here, and you are safe, and you are held, and you are home in the oldest possible sense. Home in the world, home in the night, home in the breathing dark that has always been and will always be the beginning and the end of sleep. The amber grove is still in the dark, its resin cooling, its ancient surfaces holding the ancient shapes of ancient things. The tidal pools breathe with the rhythm of the sea. The lagoon is a dark mirror under the stars, the reflection of each star trembling slightly in the gentle movement of the surface water, each reflected star a small point of cold light in the warm, dark water. The crocodilian on the bank is still and warm and deeply asleep. The Parasaurolophus move through the midnight valley in their slow, silent circuit, their crests dark against the star-filled sky, their vast and gentle bodies displacing the wet grass with the soft, rhythmic sounds of large animals moving without urgency through a world they know completely. Let all of it go now, not away. Let it go into you, into the warm, expanding space that sleep is opening behind your eyes, into the dark where the day's harvest is stored. The green morning light, the amber afternoon, the rain on ancient leaves, the bioluminescent fungus cold and blue in the forest night, the warm volcanic rock under your back and the Milky Way above you and the sea, the ancient warm sea floating you in its old salt water, holding you as it holds everything that trusts itself to it. Every breath you take goes out into the night air and is breathed by the forest, is processed by the leaves, is returned to you again altered and renewed, in the circular, continuous exchange that makes every breathing organism complicit with every other breathing organism, partners in the oldest metabolism on Earth. You are breathing with the forest. The forest is breathing with you. There is no boundary here, in this state, in this night, in this ancient world, between the breathing that is yours and the breathing that belongs to the 10,000 other systems surrounding you. It is all one breath. One long, slow, continuous breath that has been going on since the first photosynthetic organism released the first molecule of oxygen into the first ancient air, and that will go on for as long as there is something to breathe and something to breathe with. You're going now, not away, toward the rest that your body has been building toward all day, toward the sleep that has been waiting with the patience of something that knows it will be reached eventually and does not need to hurry, toward the dark that is not the absence of the island, but the island at its most intimate, reduced to warmth and sound and the breathing of the world around you, toward the place where the stories that you carry, of this day, of this world, of the lagoon and the herds and the amber grove and the ancient sea, become the material of dreams, become the images that your resting mind produces from the day's harvest, becomes the thing you wake from, knowing something that you did not know before, though you will not quite be able to say what it is. Rest now. The island breathes, the stars move, everything continues, and you, warm and held, and exactly where you need to be, finally, fully, let go. The Cretaceous holds everything tonight. The ancient world holds everything tonight, and sleep, good, deep, ancient, restorative sleep, holds you, as it has always held every creature at the end of every day since the first creature first closed its eyes against the first night, trusting the darkness, trusting the return of the light, trusting the world to continue its extraordinary work without requiring your attention for a few blessed hours. The work continues, the world continues, and you rest, and everything is well. If you liked this video, let me know where in the world you're watching from and what time it is. I'm always curious about that. And if you have a suggested topic for the next story, feel free to leave it in the comments below.